What was that disgusting thing someone you were dating told you and it changed your image of them? He laughed his way through a story about how several of his friends cornered a guy at a restaurant for heckling them from a table over, most likely telling them to calm or quiet down. The victim was apparently injured but didn't press charges. My date insisted that he didn't participate in the brawl. I didn't believe him. I was genuinely surprised by my horror. When I broke up with him, I told him it was because he lacked empathy. The story above was particularly bad, but there were others that told me not to trust him as a partner. He took it surprisingly well in the moment, but later started posting misogynistic content on his social media platform. He's now married after having dated his now wife for only a little over a year. I worry for her. Yup, you definitely dodged a psychopathic bullet. Story 2. After knowing him for like 6 years, he randomly told me he was really depressed. I quit my old job and that I had lost a lot of use to him. The wording really threw me off. He's pretty good at masking, so I thought he just misstated it. Surely my use wasn't my career. Oh no, it was. He said that a big part of his interest in me was my career because he had hoped to have one like mine, and it's how we met, so my switching was a bit of a letdown. Eventually, he clarified that even though I was now making over 5 times salary to what I made at my prior job and had completely transformed my life, I shared a lot of that money with him, daily, from good food to designer clothes he liked. The fact that I no longer worked in his industry made him sad every day, and he felt like I should have stayed in that industry to help his career by having contacts and advice. But he knew I was selfish and would take that the wrong way. Oh my gosh, please tell me you dropped him like a bag of potatoes, bro. Story 3. Not really dating because we had only one date, but this guy on a first date proudly tells me about how when his ex kicked him out of the house. She owned the house. He took an upper decker in all 3 of the toilets in the house, meaning he crapped in a tank and hid crap between the mattress and box spring of her bed and the gas bed, and also smeared on the bottom of several kitchen drawers and the 2 register vents. The kicker, his version of why she kicked him out and deserved the crap, literally, he gave her was she was crazy. She got jealous just because she was wasting her life working for the man, and I still know how to have fun and not let money control me. I bailed on that date so fast. Story 4. A couple of months after an ex cheated on me and I gave him another chance, one of his friends who I liked hanging out with confessed to being into me. I told my ex-boyfriend at the time what happened and he said he knew and even encouraged his friend to try to hook up with me because you guys flirt all the time, so go for it, and we'll call it even. Made me realize how emotionally manipulative he was, trying to bait me into sleeping with someone else so I didn't have a leg to stand on anymore. Story 5. We had been together 15 years. I confessed to him that I was having depressive thoughts and was basically begging him for help. He told me that I was worthless. He hated me and that he wished he could end me himself, which I found to be very impolite. The reason I stayed was because I felt trapped. At the time, there was every cruelty that one could be given with the exception of physical, though that was sporadic. Emotional and financial, I felt worthless and that I was lucky that someone was to care about me. A disabled, worthless waste of skin who suffered from a crippling pain condition, which led to depression and anxiety. He isolated me from all my friends, even tried to isolate me from my family. After he said the above, I actually ended up in the hospital with a life-threatening infection within days of him saying that. I've been ignoring the infection because things were so bad at home. I was scared to leave my daughter and my dog with him. He was mad that I took off for over a week. I was in intensive care and having emergency surgery. I should have been in the hospital for weeks, but between the lockdown and me threatening to sign out AMA so I could get home to my daughter, I'd managed to strike a deal of sorts with the doctors at the hospital for them to let me leave well before I should have. When I came home, he was still angry about me being depressed. Refused to help me even though I was still very ill and had a giant surgical wound to deal with. That was when I decided enough was enough. My daughter was old enough to start really understanding how he treats me, and I'll be damned if she thinks this is what a relationship is supposed to be like. It's been almost exactly 2 years of careful planning, secrets, and support of loving friends who welcome me back into our group with open arms. I'm just waiting to hear back about housing assistance, and then me and my daughter can start a new and happier life. If someone reading this is going through something similar, I promise, you can get out. It might take time, but you can do it. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other and don't give up hope. You're loved. I promise you are. I hope that reached a lot of people. Story 6. First date. Guy called the waitress the freaking N-word. Thank God she didn't hear. He and I had an intense exchange and I saw his jaw lock up. That's what my ex-husband's jaw would do right before he was going to lose it, so I was on defense and a tad scared, but I held my own. Then it made him very mad. I can't remember what I said, but I knew it was angering him, so I backed up a bit and told a joke. He then made a half-serious joke about leaving me at the restaurant, and I said good thing I drove. I drove myself on the first few dates as a matter of personal policy so I can leave if I need. The date ended early and I never saw him again. Screw that crap. How ignorant does one have to be to say that about another person? I don't get it. I never will. Story 7. I deal with sciatica. It's excruciatingly painful and makes walking difficult. I walk with a pretty severe limp. This was new to me 3 years ago and new to her. She didn't see the extent of my pain display due to the amount I was working at the time. Our first time in public, walking from the car to Home Depot. She stops in her tracks, turns to me and says, "You need to stop walking like that. You're embarrassing me. People are looking." The tone of utter disgust and anger in her voice was repulsive. I felt so hurt, betrayed, and disappointed. My entire image of this woman that I loved had shattered. Everything was downhill from there. Several months later, I'd been taking an antidepressant, which she offered up the task of refilling my monthly pill sorter because I was struggling to keep up with my meds. Each day had its own pod. I was on so many different meds at one point that I just assumed that everything was in the pods and I'd wake up and take the whole thing like a shot. She failed to inform me that after X day, I was out of said antidepressant and it needed a refill called in. As a result of this, over the course of the next several days, I had increasingly worsening withdrawal symptoms. One day, upon returning home with my son, I collapsed on the porch steps and I blacked out. He banged on the door and was screaming for me to wake up. I eventually was somewhat mentally there, but physically I could not get up or say anything. She finally came out, pulled him quickly into the house and came out and nudged me with her foot several times and with that same tone from before said, "Get up. This is disgusting and you're embarrassing me. The neighbors can see you." And then proceeded to leave me on the porch for 15 plus minutes, till I was able to crawl inside. There's so many other instances of this from this woman that I can't even remember half of them, but I remember how she made me feel. I don't ever want to date again. I've never felt so betrayed in my life. Dude, that was a disgusting human being. I don't think most of people are like that. Story 8. I was in a drama group and the girl I was crushing on was super sweet. I'd been homeschooled, super naive, and never saw her do anything mean. I adored her. There was another girl who had some kind of medical condition that meant she sometimes whizzed her pants a little. She was very poor and often smelled bad. A sweet crush proactively went up to the stinky girl in front of everyone and asked her, "Is that a new perfume you're wearing? You smell so good." The stinky girl's face immediately dropped and she got this look like she didn't know what to say. Didn't know if this was mean or not. She replied, "Actually, yes, thank you for noticing," and immediately left the room. As a bunch of people who witnessed the whole thing laughed and my crush turned around and let out a huge laugh she'd been stifling. I immediately couldn't even look at her anymore. I hope that one day she whizzes herself in public and everyone can see. Story 9. Told me all about a play he once wrote to humanize mistreatment. It involved a woman sitting on the stage, pretending to be intoxicated at a bar, with all these men sitting around her, and it flashed back to the days of all these men, showing something that had gone wrong in each of their lives. Divorce, losing their job, being rejected for a date, etc. After that, the woman staggers off the stage, clearly intoxicated. All the men then look at each other and follow her off stage, implying that they do something because they all had a bad day. Genuinely the worst thing I've ever heard. It was a self-proclaimed feminist, too. Interestingly, a friend of her friend then told me all about the guy she'd been dating for 6 months and how she'd broken it off after he told her about his play. Turns out we both dated him. What a world. He's now unfortunately pretty influential in my local art scene, but I spread the word about him when I can. I hope he gets exposed and gets institutionalized. Story 10. Dude told me that autistic people and mentally disabled people went to hell because they could not understand Jesus' love and sacrifice for them. Not a date, but a friend and I were once, years ago, waiting in line at a fast food place, and there were a few teenage girls ahead of us, just chatting away. Our friend and I, both in our 30s, ignored them. Well, I did. He kept staring at them and finally whispered to me how attractive he thought they were and how interesting it would be to make them do things together. Yeah, it's okay to like it. Go ahead. Both of you. It's okay to like it. To this day, I think the only reason they didn't hear him is because the lobby was so loud, but it creeped me the crap out. He later told me he'd never do anything because he doesn't want to go to prison, but also called me out for not thinking girl on girl is hot when I'm a lesbian. Not me, but my mom's ex-boyfriend had an argument with her because he wanted to go camping or hunting most weekends, and she didn't want him to. Plenty of things needed to be done around the house, chore-wise. He said that she got to do her hobby every week and he never complained, so he should be able to, at least twice a month. Her hobby in his mind was going grocery shopping. And to a degree, doing laundry. Story 11. I'm the only one who will ever be able to make you finish. My immediate thought was, oh, heck no. First of all, I can do it myself just fine, thank you very much. Last I checked, so many other men are thrilled to be shown just how a woman likes it. But honestly, it was said with so much blatant audacity and plain manipulation that it immediately made me want to go sleep with other people. Lol. It didn't, but it planted the seed, I'm telling you. That was the beginning of the end for him. I hadn't even considered the possibility of dumping his cruel, lying, controlling schmuck self before he said those disgusting, stupid words. But oh, suddenly I was like, you know what? I think maybe his Johnson isn't all that. Maybe he's a nasty piece of crap and I deserve better. Not him, like he'd been saying. After we broke up, I got together with my best friend and immediately confirmed my suspicions that my ex was an idiot. I'm happy to say my now husband is the best intimacy I've ever had, and he's not a disgusting schmuck. Story 12. If you don't get a termination, then we will never work out. Some background. We were in our mid-20s and about to be married when we found out. We both wanted kids, and I made it very clear 2 years prior before we ever had intimacy that I personally could not bring myself to have a termination, so if I ended up pregnant, I would see the pregnancy through. I dealt with a lot of mental health issues when I was younger, and I knew the emotional toll of a termination would destroy me, as I had family and friends who went through it, and I saw from them that emotional side. I also am and have always been pro-choice. When we found out we were expecting, I had me talk with each and every one of our friends who were pro-choice to try and get me to terminate the pregnancy. Fast forward to now. I have an amazing 8-year-old son, divorced from his father, but remarried with 2 other little ones. Never once second thought about my choice. Story 13. Living in London, my ex was racist. He said crazy stuff like brown people, I'm South Asian, deserve to be stereotyped as tormentors for the safety of the population. Okay. His mother said that if the British harmed any groups of people, then they must have deserved it. By the way, they were Jewish, and it goes without saying that what happened was an atrocity, but I was so surprised at the lack of empathy for other groups of people within his one family. It was also misogynist. He tried to dictate what I could wear. I started covering up in front of him because he made me feel uncomfortable, almost like he was a creepy family member. But he knew I didn't otherwise, which angered him. He also said when he sees a girl in a skirt or anything revealing, he gets an intense reaction, like his whole body will tense up and his hands become fists. He had a sheltered upbringing, and I think it really messed him up in some ways. Story 14. I had an ex who bought a house and asked me to move in with her. She then decided that the job we both did was too much and quit without consulting me, meaning that I had to pay her mortgage. She then got a job at a supermarket, filling shelves on minimum wage at around 1/5 of her original earnings. Money was tight, but we survived. Walking around town a few months later, I decided to buy a Homer Simpson air freshener for £1, only to be told that we couldn't afford something so frivolous. We should only buy necessities. Fair enough. I put it back, and that was that. When we got home, we emptied the shopping out, and there were 2 small jars of ice cream that cost over £50 each. I picked one up and asked, "Necessity?" I was told yes. Do you want me to look all worn out? I started planning my escape there and then. I spoke to a solicitor, and he basically told me that the bad news was that nothing was in my name, but the good news was that nothing was in my name. I stopped paying all the bills, including the mortgage, and a few weeks later, I found out she was also cheating on me. I begged her to let me stay for a few more weeks until I found somewhere else. It ended up being 6 weeks. I promised to keep paying the bills until I left. When I moved all my stuff out, I presented her with a pile of unpaid bills, including 3 missed mortgage payments, and told her that her new squeeze Darren, the security guard, can pay them. If she'd just been honest and not used me as a meal ticket, I would have been happy to pack up and move out. Screw you, Joe. You deserved it. Story 15. Not as insane as some of the stuff on here, but he used to make comments about other women in supermarkets or on the street. Like comments about them having too much lip filler and weird fake eyelashes. Things that I simply don't tend to notice. If I do, I don't comment on them. Yes, I think too much lip filler looks terrible, but live and let live. It was always women he made comments about. And every time he did, it repelled me. Made me feel like he went around judging everything. He had a general misanthropic view of people that would pull my mood down too. Story 16. When my ex-husband and I were having fertility issues and we had an appointment with my OBGYN to figure out what the issues were, the doctor asked him if he was able to have children. He said yes, then told me he had apparently gotten someone pregnant. He told me that I was the second person he slept with, and after this revelation, he said I was the third. Later, he said I was the fourth. He then proceeded to tell me that he knew this girl at an RV park where his mom lived. I lived there too, and that he had gotten her pregnant. The story changed several times about what happened, starting with her having a miscarriage the day after and ending with him saying he probably just dreamed the whole thing. Another one is he had gone to visit this woman he knew was dating online before he met me. We had only been dating maybe 2 weeks at this point, and he told me the plane tickets were non-refundable. After 5 years of asking him if he cheated on me and him saying no, one night he finally said yes. Then he changed his story, again, that he didn't actually sleep with her. Made me realize I could never trust anything he said, and that he would change his stories and lie so he wouldn't upset me and I wouldn't leave. Pathological liar much? Story 17. Jokes about inappropriate stuff. I said they aren't funny and I don't like it, so please refrain from doing it. 4 more times in 4 separate conversations, he said something or joked about it again. I said something each time. The final time I was all, oh yay, more jokes that nobody thinks are funny, and ghosted him from there. Got a message a few weeks later asking if he had done something wrong after I hadn't responded to any of his hey messages. So I was like, yep. He then asked what he'd done, and I said about the jokes I'd already told him I didn't like, and he kept doing it. He acted bewildered and couldn't remember any time he joked about it after the first time. I pointed out the exact conversations, his joke and my responses, and then he said something like, I know it's no excuse, but it's been a really hard year for me, or something equally ridiculous, and I just never replied again. Aw, boo-hoo, it's been a really hard year for you. I hope it continues to be hard, bro. Story 18. Significant age gap, and we started dating when I was 18, met at 17. Like 6 months into our relationship, he pulled the icky cliche of saying he thought I was very mature for my age as soon as he met me, and so did the other men in our friend group, then added that he won. I asked what he meant. They said when I left the day I met all of them and they had all stayed behind, they joked about who would be the one who did me first. He said this in front of the guys in said friend group, and they were all joking about it. I wish I could say I broke up with him immediately, but it took my idiot self another 3 months. You know, something bad should happen to people like that. Story 19. My ex was my high school sweetheart. We were both in the same year. Many years after finishing school, we were talking about school life and the people who were in our year, and I mentioned Brad Heap, not his real first name. He was pestered relentlessly for being poor and in foster care. He had a canvas bag that was kind of old-fashioned, and some kid would call him a heap of crap. I was really withdrawn, and I felt for him. I showed Brad my timetable and told him he was welcome to join me during my photography class, and I usually had the dark room to myself as the majority of my class were doing digital photography. I wanted him to have some reprieve from the schmucks that pestered him, as I could never find Brad during our lunch breaks. My ex laughed heartily and told me how he and 3 other boys in my year chased Brad down and hurt him. Writing this now brings tears to my eyes. Brad was an awesome guy who just needed a friend. I hate my ex with every fiber of my being for what he did to Brad, and I told him in no uncertain terms how much of a freaking low-life, cowardly piece of crap he is. If you're enjoying the video, or you're not enjoying the video and these stories are making you angry, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 20. This will sound pretty silly after all the incredibly horrifying things I've read in this thread, but a couple of years ago I met this chap who had gone to Harvard Medical School and was clearly way too into it. I'd already agreed to the date, had a headache and a cold, which I told him the night before, but he insisted he has gone to medical school, he'll be fine, etc. I overslept, and the day that was supposed to be our first date, I ended up reaching 1 hour late. I profusely apologized, kept apologizing, etc. Key. I can't believe you made a Harvard man wait. Me, laughing, because, of course, that's a joke, right? Wrong. He meant every word of it. He truly couldn't understand how I made a Harvard man wait. It was hilarious because my family is, well, very high achieving. I've never heard of or seen any of my family members behave this way. It was so weird because he truly believed that he should be treated differently because he was a Harvard man. Yeah, I pretended to have a good time and I left quickly. Story 21. One of the first times I met his adult son, my ex told me about how he hurt his kid for lying to him one day. I bragged about making his kid pack up a suitcase, dropped him off at a bus stop, and drove away. His son was like 7 at the time, and he basically abandoned him in public and was laughing about it. Oh, but I only drove around the block to teach him a lesson. I came right back. He thought it was hysterical, and I could see his son's heart breaking all over again. They continued to have a rocky relationship the entire time I knew him. We had already been together for several years at that point, and he had done a few things that tarnished my image of him. But this was probably when I realized he was just overall a crappy person and a horrible parent. His own father never loved him, probably. Story 22. Close to the end of our relationship, my ex admitted to me that he had a deep-rooted fixation to corn and women. He told me about how he would look at women on Reddit to and from his way to work. He would watch and do stuff at work. He also called me in the midst of our breakup to tell me he had a dream that he had a sister. He only has brothers. That in the dream he did something and he enjoyed it, and he basically told me that as an empathetic and emotionally in tune person, I had a responsibility not to go through with a breakup, but rather stay and basically be his therapist. This is after I broke up with him for being cruel, and also once his mask came off, I realized I was in a really scary situation with a very unhealthy person who just happened to be amazing at hiding it. I could go on and on about the crazy messed up crap this guy put me through. Knowing he's out there, possibly dating other women, is genuinely scary to me. He hates women and only wants to mistreat them and sees them as objects. It was awful. Still awful thinking about it to this day. They'd been separated for over a year. The phone call about what he did to his sister was the last straw for me. Suddenly it all clicked, and I just didn't feel safe anymore. Very traumatic dating experience for me. Story 23. For me, it's when they say misogynistic crap and they try to convince me that I'm overthinking things. This hasn't been just guys I'm dating, but my own family members, male friends, business associates, etc. Some examples are things like revealing that they believe women have life easier than men because women control intimacy. One guy I dated told me that if I was going to be his wife, I didn't have to go to college because he doesn't like his women having jobs. When I recoiled in shock, he acted as if I was insane for not thinking that was endearing. Oh, how sweet of a line. Story 24. I am gay. In college, I dated a guy a couple of years younger than me. He was a freshman and I was a junior. We were both from the same conservative state, and his family especially was quite homophobic. Around that time, there were headlines about genetic engineering that could potentially or eventually eliminate certain genetic conditions like Down syndrome, etc. This kid straight up told me that he thought it should be used to eliminate homosexuality, assuming it is caused specifically by your genes. We didn't last more than a couple months after that, and not just for that reason, but this was over a decade ago, and I remember it so vividly. The internalized homophobia is so strong in some of us. I understand wanting to be free of the stigma and pain that comes with living authentically as a queer person, but what we should hope for is a shift in culture towards tolerance and respect, not a shift in technology that eliminates us entirely. Story 25. After I allowed him to get me to sleep, yes, I know, I'm an idiot, to fulfill one of his fantasies, he told me the next day he was still in love with his ex, who was never physically met and lives on the other side of the world. I backed off, and rather than be spiteful or nasty, I tried to educate him about my mental disorder so he would be aware of who was affecting my mental health. I asked if he would watch a video about rejection sensitivity dysphoria, part of my ADHD and autism combo. He claimed to watch it. Then he told me to get over it. He's also on the spectrum, and he told another person who he claimed to love, get over it. Get over being upset that he was repeatedly rejecting me for someone online, even after I'd compromised myself for his fantasy. His ex was never his ex. They were doing crap the entire time, and I called him out for his behavior. He called himself a sociopath as an excuse. He isn't diagnosed. I told him to freaking deal with it then. He then said, what, so I can be a user like my parents? Taking 30 pills a day to make me normal? That's a boon, not having emotions, because it means I can walk away from anything bothering me. He doesn't walk away when things are bothering him. He sits there like a lump and does nothing. Both his parents have disabilities and health conditions requiring them to be on medications. He called them users. Yep, institutionalized. Story 26. Wasn't really dating per se, but was hanging out and drove him to my place. On the way, he says, oh, bro, he looks like he'd be hot, pointing to this dude on a skateboard. The skater dude in question was the son of a family friend. Thing is, this skater dude Ben doesn't even really look older than his age. Whether my date needed glasses or simply mistook him for an older guy, I don't know. I blocked him after and never saw him again. For your information, this day guy was 11 years older than Mr., so I don't know, maybe he was a P. Story 27. Asked me if I wanted a donut from the apple orchard. We've been dating for 3 years, lived together. He cheated all the time and was extremely cruel. I was truly brainwashed into believing I was worthless. The whole 9 yards. I had no family, but the one good memory I had of my family as a child was getting donuts from our local apple orchard and picking apples. I asked him every year for 3 years to go with me, since I had no friends or family. He refused. Lo and behold, he takes the girl he was currently cheating with to the exact same apple orchard I told him about. There are many in the area. That one was special to me. Brought back donuts and was boasting about the wonderful time they had, asked me if I wanted one. All of the BS hit me, so I packed all my stuff that instant and left. Didn't know where I was going to go. All I knew was screw him for trying to ruin my apple orchard donuts. It took away a lot from me already, and I'd be damned if I was going to let him take that good memory from me too. Story 28. Back when she was in middle school, an ex-girlfriend was invited to the birthday party of a not very popular girl in her class. She went to the party and they all had a good time. A week later, one of the popular kids in her class had her birthday, and this birthday girl's wealthier parents rented wealthier birthday girl a limo. They had the limo drive by the unpopular girl's house and they all yelled mean crap out the windows at unpopular birthday girl as they drove by. I said, God, children can be such schmucks. I mean, as a college student now, you must obviously wish you could go back and change doing that. And she was, nope, I don't have a problem with it. I remember thinking, I must be misunderstanding something. Nope, I discovered that she just had this, sometimes she takes joy from being cruel to others streak. Story 29. I was wondering if he had a lot of empathy. He seemed very intelligent, but a little reserved emotionally, so I asked a question. I forget what, exactly. He proceeded to tell me a story about how the only female colleague in his office had lost some weight and was really proud. At work dinner they all had, she brought this up and showed a before picture and jokingly remarked, I was really fat though here, was I? Everyone said no, naturally, except for him. When it reached his turn, he told me he looked her straight in the eye and said, yes, you were. The whole table burst into laughter and she was humiliated and walked away. His male colleagues told him they were all thinking it, but you couldn't actually say it out loud. It was encouraged by a few to apologize. Not sincerely, mind you, purely for optics' sake, and he refused. He told me he wouldn't apologize because it was indeed true. He sounded smug as he was telling me all this. Needless to say, that was the last conversation we ever had. You can't teach empathy. Yeah, especially not to psychopaths. Story 30. A man walked over at a gas station he was at who was very clearly down in his luck. From the description, he was stuck there in a beat-up old car parked with his poor wife and kids and what few possessions they had. They'd run out of gas. The man humbly asked if my ex had just a few dollars so they could get enough gas to get to some place down the road where they might get to stay. They'd lost their home. Know what this selfish schmuck did? Asked the guy, well, what you got for me? The poor man had nothing but his wedding ring, so he gave it to my ex for the $20 he got in exchange. He was genuinely shocked I was upset. No joke, I broke it off that moment and told him to never call me again. He acted like I was being ridiculous. If a person takes advantage of someone like that, it says all you need to know. Story 31. I'm a gay man, and years ago a friendship I had with a male friend, who I thought was straight, became romantic. He came out as bisexual and we dated for a while. It was interesting dating him, because for him, being in a same-gender relationship was very exciting and fun with very few drawbacks, something he had wanted to try out. I came out really young. I was and am fully gay, and it had led to a lot of anxiety and really informed my teen years and adulthood too. But I was happy for him to have such a positive experience with it. The one time it got really weird and maybe spoiled the whole thing was when one night when the lights were off and we were in a pillow talking situation, I asked him about his experiences with women. He started describing a time in his life when he was pretty promiscuous and talked about intimacy with women in a really unfiltered way. The way he talked about it, and the things he considered most interesting or funniest, seemed kind of messed up to me. I realized he was talking about women to me the way straight men talk to other straight men about it. I couldn't see him the same way again, and at that moment, I hated that I was sharing a bed with him. He was in all other ways a very nice dude. Still think super highly of him and reflect on it as a very good relationship, but that moment made me think we were potentially just too different. Story 32. A lot of these comments are really deeply awful things, so I feel bad that this is relatively silly, but he does something with his nose mess. He accidentally did it in front of me once when we'd been living together for almost 2 years. I glossed over him repeatedly, calling me unattractive or commenting negatively on my face early on when we were just friends who worked together. And we made it to this stage. I saw him once and was like, oh, what the heck? And he just explained that he liked the taste and didn't see what the big deal was. My stomach still churns. I stayed disgusted for over a decade and counting, it turns out. So he sent me an article that backed up his claim that it was actually good for your immune system. I just can't. Story 33. If you were mistreated, I would never be able to look at you the same way again. At the time, I thought this was sweet because he seemed distressed at the idea of me being hurt. Now that I'm an adult, however, I can see what he really meant. He didn't look distressed for me, he looked disgusted with me. He slowly lowered his mask during the rest of the relationship. He became controlling and manipulative, always punishing me with silent treatment. If I was mistreated, I would no longer be pure in his eyes because someone else would go to ruin me. He only wanted to take my V-card. Thankfully, I broke up with him before he could do that. Bone chilling to think of it all now. What a disgusting human being who doesn't deserve to live. Story 34. My first date, he told me, if we were dating, you wouldn't be allowed to do that or that would have to stop. I pulled up in a different car than what I said I'd drive and he asked about it. I'd let my ex-husband or father of my kids borrow my car because he was in the shop and I borrowed my mom's extra car. Money was tight and he was paying a decent amount of child support that wasn't even court-ordered. I only needed it for one day and didn't make sense to go through the process of renting a car and expenses for one day. He said he wouldn't allow that. They told me what kind of a person he was. I'll always help the father of my kids just as he does for me. How he's doing and whether he's struggling or whatever affects our kids. He also tried to change my food order from a burger to salad. Nope, right out of there. People are crazy. Story 35. I dated someone for 18 months. I lived with them for a year during that time. They were always very protective of their computers. I didn't think much of it because they were computer scientists that worked for a company that regularly had government contracts, so I thought it was probably something that might require a security clearance to view. One day I needed a flash drive and didn't think much about it, so I got one from their office. I plugged it in and then noticed it was almost full. I know I should have just returned the drive and maybe looked for another one, but curiosity got the better of me. I looked at the files. It was corn. I was so disgusted. I packed a bag and left within a couple of hours. I also called in a tip to law enforcement. They tried to call me many times in the weeks after that, but I never answered. I never talked to them again. Story 36. During our divorce, I made it clear that I wanted to still be there for her if she ever really needed help. A few months after it was official, she emailed me, "Emergency, please call me." Of course, I rushed and called her immediately. She wanted me to accompany her to the hospital because she had some medical or hospital or doctor anxiety. Being a nurse, I agreed without question and we went in. Spent over 8 hours there, pretending to still be married, mind you. Her name change wasn't official yet, so she would have my insurance cover her costs. We even got ice cream together afterwards. I emailed her the day after to ask how she was and if there was anything else she needed. It's been 8 months since that day and she never responded. Divorce was indeed the correct choice in the end. Story 37. He told me that in high school he and his best friend, who was extremely wealthy and lived in an affluent neighborhood, waited for the neighbor to leave her house and then broke in and proceeded to steal whatever they could get their hands on. They took DVDs, TVs, electronics, etc., and they ran everything back across the street and watched her arrive back home. They watched the police arrive and saw how terrified she was that someone had been in her house. They just laughed and watched. The same guy, separate incident, answered a phone call and realized it was a scam call. Instead of hanging up and blocking the number, he totally went off on the person. "I'm a Marine. I bet it ended some of your family members while I was over in Afghanistan. You deserve it, you piece of crap." I hate scammers as much as the next person, but there was something so cold and nasty about the way it was delivered. He got almost a sick enjoyment out of taunting this person. He heard this from the next room over and was absolutely disgusted. This man was my fiancé. Story 38. This ex had a broken tooth. He was a lean guy and was a great talker. He curated this personality around the tooth that he doesn't like to fist fight or get physical in any altercation because the last time he really beat up the other party very badly. And he did not like that side of him. From then on, he decided he would never throw the first punch. A few years in, during one of the conversations while chilling with his family, someone brought up the time this ex got home crying because they fell off their bicycle and broke a tooth. I caught him cheating for the nth time recently. But this broke the camel's back. Story 39. For context, I live in Florida, and this was about 2 years ago, and some law passed about students not being allowed to discuss if they had gay parents in the classroom, or teachers not being allowed to mention that non-hetero moms and dads exist. I was venting to my boyfriend at the time about this and saying how it was hurtful and scary to me, because I remembered how isolated I felt sometimes growing up with two moms and the weird crap kids or adults would say to me. His response? "I think you're blowing it out of proportion. I don't really see how any of that is a big deal at all. It's not like those discussions need to happen outside of the home anyways." It's not like he said the most terrible thing, but it was one of many moments where I realized we're extremely different people with extremely opposing values in life. He also made other charming statements like, "Yeah, I just don't think black women are attractive." He said what? Story 40. He said that before he dated me, he had a girlfriend that he'd been with for over 2 years. He got into an argument one day and he wanted to get back at her. So he asked her sister to hang out and then got her intoxicated. He was so proud of this and I was horrified again and he thought my reaction was ridiculous. Being like, "You don't understand. My ex was being a witch and she totally deserved it." I was like, "What about her sister?" And he just shrugged. I bet that completely ruined her relationship with her sister, and for what? Story 41. Not disgusting, but immediately changed my mind about this girl. Girl I dated a few years ago. Went well, second day back at my place having a few drinks. We hadn't slept together yet on the previous date. Anyhow, not sure how the conversation started, but she said in this very arrogant way, "Oh, I usually date guys who are 6'2" to 6'5", broad shoulders, square jaw, etc., etc." bragged about hot guys she had slept with and how she had gone home with a guy just after meeting him. I could see it was some weird attempt to belittle me, like I should be blessed for having this beautiful girl. She was very pretty. I slept with all the supermodel guys in my presence kind of vibe. Anyways, I'm certainly not bad looking and definitely confident in myself, so it didn't bother me at all. And I remember thinking internally, that's a weird thing to say to someone you're about to have intimacy with. Actually, I thought it was kind of funny. It was so stupid. Anyway, she stayed over that night and we had fun. We went on a few more dates, but I had no interest in her after that, aside from something casual, and I ended it shortly after. Basically just went from someone I was very attracted to and felt some chemistry with. She was quite fun until that point, to immediately thinking, nah, this is going to be a few nights of fun and that's it. Within 5 seconds of her saying that. Girls, what is your... He seemed normal on the first date, but after that, things got weird. Story. We met at a party. He was very funny and good looking. First day was amazing. We went to dinner, saw a live band, and went stargazing. Next day, he becomes extremely pushy about intimacy and starts to go downhill from there. He tells me he can't wait to get me pregnant. He has fantasies about me. Didn't last much longer than that. Turns out he was starting to use substances too. Yeah, it's pretty clear he did. Story 2. Right after he picked me up, he ran into Walgreens really quickly and asked to put his bag in my purse. Naturally, I assumed he bought candy since we were going to the movies. Nope. Right after the opening preview started, he pulled out a brand new hairbrush, ripped the packaging off, did the fake yawn to put his arm around me while holding the brush and started brushing my hair. I didn't move because I was shocked that it was happening and didn't know what the heck to do. He then leans his head on my shoulder while still brushing my hair and starts smelling my hair. That was the last time I did not drive and meet on first dates. If you're into something weird like that, don't be a schmuck and pull that crap on a first date at the movies without talking to them about it. The concept of consent is a crazy thing. Story 3. I had a similar encounter with a dude, only we never dated. It started off as being friends, me making it clear that I was not interested in dating anyone. Crap escalated to him, starting arguments with me and trying to manipulate me into getting what he wanted. I constantly told him I wasn't interested in having a boyfriend. So his response was to say that he didn't want a girlfriend, just someone to cuddle with and have intimate moments with and talk to about his life. You know, like a girlfriend. The end point for me was when he realized that me telling him to back off meant he would recruit his friend to basically spy on me. This guy was constantly dropping by my place to chat. When I did eventually go on a date, the friend magically showed up 10 minutes into it. I confronted the guy and threatened to report him if he ever contacted me again. The last I heard from him was when he texted me to let me know he was starting to work at a restaurant everyone here frequents. The sort of heads up I appreciated, but didn't respond to. No need to give him any chance. Story 4. Went out with a guy who seemed normal. I'm private, so I didn't know where I lived. Social media, nothing but my phone number, which was just a burner as I was living in Paris and needed something cheap to communicate. End of the first date, we start discussing politics and religion. We held different viewpoints, but we were both calm and rational. Never got heated. Next day, he sends me multiple long paragraph texts saying he didn't like argumentative women, that I was dumb barking witch who needs to get hurt. No man wants a woman who debates him. Legit quote. Flooded my WhatsApp with extremely long paragraphs of that nature. I leaned on the detached side, so I laughed and blocked him. An hour later, he sent me more deranged messages on Facebook. Again, he didn't have any of my social media info, and my Facebook is under a different name with a random email address. Screw you, bitch. Don't ignore me. Blah, blah. Slightly alarmed, I blocked him. Next day, my email, the one I use for friends and families, flooded with messages from him. My Instagram, not connected with my email or Facebook and is under a random username, was flooded with his comments. Somehow he gets my real US phone number and sends me texts saying he found out where my metro stop was, knew the area my house was in. That freaked me out. Somewhere there, he mentioned how he hates American witches, how the last American witch put him in jail when he was last in the US and studying as an international student. Anyway, I would have gone to the police, but I was leaving for Portugal the following week, so I just kept him blocked on everything and changed my US number. If only he used all those skills to get a job. Story 5. This was more than one day, but it was still pretty early in the relationship and is so weird. I thought it was worth sharing. Hope you guys agree. Not my story, but happened to a friend's sister. Friend and I were in college. My sister was mid-20s and getting serious with a new guy. He seemed fantastic, and she was starting to think he was the one. After a few months, things started getting serious, and he told her there was something important he needed to share. She was thinking he wants to move in or popped the question and getting pretty excited. Goes over to his place on the big night, barely able to contain her excitement, at which point he shows her his secret room. It was really a walk-in closet, but he had it set up with a huge replica of a Smurf village and liked to play there in his free time. Like all of his free time. More than hanging out with friends or anything. Acting out storylines with the Smurfs and pretending he was one, too. That was a big part of his life, and he hoped she was as into it as he was. She was not. God forbid a man has hobbies. Jeez. Story 6. I went out on a date with someone I met off POF. It was cute and seemed fairly normal. We met for coffee, went back to my place, yada yada yada. It was a good time. About a week later, a friend of mine in another state posted about how she found a high school classmate of hers on her state's offender registry. I decided to see if anyone I knew was on it, or if there were any living near me. So I did a search of my state's registry. Well, 3 guesses who I found on it. He has a common name, but I knew it was him because the picture in the registry was the same one he used on Plenty of Fish. There was no second date. The universe gave you a sign, girl. Story 7. Okay, so I was first introduced to him as my parents' friend's son, and my parents were gushing about how he's such a great church-going guy and will definitely take care of me and make sure I'll behave. While I was alone in LA for college. We hung out a couple of times, which seemed normal. He asked me out, and I said yes as a screw you to my parents. First day was okay. He seemed normal. Really quiet, shy, and awkward, but he was adorable. Second date, he comes off as pretty intense. Told me he attempted to end it all just because his ex dumped him. He wasn't cheating or anything, it just didn't work out. Okay, a bit TMI, but still okay. We kissed at the end of the night, and he told me he wanted to have a baby with me. I kid you not. Oh, heck no. I was pretty creeped out by now, so I was trying to figure out how to dump him gently. I was still young, so I was still nervous about dumping people. Plus, he was the only person I knew in the US since I just moved. My friends were still overseas, so I emailed them for help. The next day, I was walking in between classes when I ran into him. My college is in LA, lives in Irvine, and that's about 1 to 2 hours drive away. I never told him my class schedule. Apparently, from stalking my Facebook wall, snippets of conversation I had with him and checking the university's list of classes, I figured out what classes I was taking, where they were located. What the heck? He proudly told me this as if it's the most romantic thing ever. I told him I'm not skipping Calculus 2 for him since that class is damn hard, but he wouldn't leave until we hung out. He asked if he could borrow my laptop to finish some homework, so I dumped him in my dorm room. I actually read through my emails. I forgot to log out and found the email I wrote to my friends where I told him how creepy he was. I came back to the room. He promptly threatened to end it all. I was stuck with him for 3 more months before I finally couldn't give a crap anymore and dumped him. He did attempt to end it all and sent me pictures of it, as well as a long essay detailing what he did. I wish I could feel guilty, but I really have no crap stuff to give. Well, was he successful? Story 8. I had a couple normal dates with this guy I met on Tinder. First, we went to dinner and just walked around the city a bit and listened to music and rode in a Ferris wheel. The second, I went over to his place and cooked us lasagna and we watched Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. When we were planning the third date, he randomly says he can't make it after all and sends me this. Yeah, it's just that I forgot that I'm a crabby person. I'm a schmuck and a liar. I'm boring. I hate literally everybody. I don't give a crap about anything. I don't care what happens to anyone, including myself. I think I'm better than everyone, but I also hate myself. Bad person, as in defective. Like a malfunctioning car engine is a bad engine. I thought I was just out with some friends and one of them was playing a really bad prank, but nope. That was the last I heard from him. Story 9. He seemed normal on OkCupid. We chatted a few times on Skype and watched Doctor Who in the span of a week. Then I met him in person and it went downhill. He talked to me about what he would be doing for the holidays and what we would name our kids and outlined our future. I'm into some interesting things. He tried pulling my hair in public. I was super not happy with that. He even showed me a picture of a piece of jewelry he had bought me with my name on it. When I told him I didn't think it was going to work out, he called and asked me to give him another chance. And he wanted to know what he would do with the necklace he bought me and if I still wanted him to give it to me. The next day, I got a call from a lady friend of his that told me he had gotten in a car crash. He was the one hit and that he had mentioned my name, so she thought we were super close and dating and asked if I wanted to visit him in the hospital. I felt awful, but I didn't go. I knew if I did, it would only encourage or justify his feelings for me. Story 10. Context, my dad is a police officer and had a very sheltered, possibly a little goody two-shoes of a childhood in a little town full of elderly folks and young families. Met him at a party and we hit it off because we're from the same little town. First day went really well. Wonderful dinner and a movie thing. I was really excited to have found someone after a rather long spell of singleness, so I agreed to a second day with no hesitation. After day 2, sushi and drinks, I get in his car for him to take me home, and he tells me he lives with his grandmother because his mom has a serious substance problem and will disappear for weeks at a time getting spiked. I thought that was already a pretty big bombshell for a second date, but he proceeded to tell me both his brothers were pretty deep into one of the Chicago gangs and had been arrested relating to crimes several times. I sat there for a beat, shocked, and he informed me that he'd told his brothers all about his new girlfriend and they wanted to meet me that weekend. I told him I wasn't comfortable with that, and he started screaming at me about being a judgmental witch, and I promptly fled and blocked him on every platform I could think of. Was he serious? Story 11. Damn, I have 3 that come to mind. Went out on a date with a guy I met at a Starbucks. Seemed nice. After the first date, he would send morning texts every day along with a morning selfie of him blowing a kiss. The selfies didn't stop there. Not just mornings, but multiple times a day, every day. I didn't block him because it just seemed so ridiculous it became a funny joke with my close friends. What selfies did Psycho Boy send you today? Then it started getting out of hand. Texts pouring in asking why I never texted back. Poor guy always having conversations with himself. I had to block him. Went out with a police officer. Gave a fake name. He found out. Too long of a story. It was crazy. Perfect example why I always give out a fake name when I meet a new guy. New kid in school. Really hot. All the girls were after him and were surprised he went for me. He was there for 3 days. 3 days. Halfway through his 3rd day in school, he asked me out on a date that weekend. I said I couldn't because I have a study day with my classmate to practice Spanish. I asked my friend what guy he was, and before school ended, he harmed the guy in the hallway. That kid was mental as heck. Never saw him again, although he tried adding me on Facebook 2 years ago. 4 kids now and pictures of him throwing up gang signs. Dodged a bullet there. Story 12. We had a first date that went okay, except he went on and on about prenuptial agreements. Like, he reintroduced the subject about 4 times. We both had similar houses and lifestyles. Anyway, I gave him the benefit of the doubt and agreed to go out with him again. About an hour before he was due to pick me up, I had a phone call from him. He explained he wouldn't be able to make it as he had been arrested and was in police custody. My response was, what on earth for? I'm not sure what I was expecting. It's a minor misdemeanor or a traffic violation. His response? For taking Jimmy Godden. Jimmy Godden was a local baddie responsible for buying up and burning down local amusement parks. The lifeblood of the seaside town I live in. He practically single-handedly destroyed our town. I don't know what happened to him after that. I never took his phone calls. I just can't catch a break with guys. Story 13. I joined OkCupid right around the time it started and talked to a seemingly nice guy on there for a little over a week before exchanging phone numbers. He had a good job, was attractive and funny, and just seemed like a cool guy all around. The first time we went out, we met at an art museum for a few hours and had a great conversation. I left feeling good about it, and we both agreed we should see each other again soon. Apparently, his definition of soon was literally the next day. I had classes all the next day and didn't really get a chance to look at my phone, but when I did, I had 5 missed calls and at least 20 texts from this dude. The latter texts included things along the lines of, "Which, who the heck do you think you are to ignore me and waste my time? You're fat and ugly anyway, and I never would have fooled with you. I bet you have diseases. You're dirty." I was just like, what just happened? Yeah, what just happened? Story 14. I don't even know how to describe this day because it was so ridiculous. Our day was basically a 2-hour power walk around our town. I like walking as much as the next guy, but this guy insisted we keep walking the entire day because he thought sitting was a waste of time. Over the course of 1.5 hours, I learned that he hated noise, despite choosing to move to a noisy area, fat people, and would divorce his future wife if she ever started freeloading or got fat. How he's so smart, how people owe him because he was so nice to them, his car, how crappy and boring everything else was, how much he hated almost all music, how he thought everything was dirty and disgusting. Partway through the date, I started laughing every time he said he hated something, which made him mad, which made me laugh more, which made him more mad. Finally, he started taking digs at me, despite having already made it clear that he thought everything I was doing was dumb and that my arms were kind of hairy for a girl. That's when I tried to note the crap out. His car was parked near my house, so we walked there together, and that's when he invited me to sit down. Apparently, he wanted to wait the 30-some minutes until the meter ran out and didn't want to be by himself. Best date ever. Will there be a second? Story 15. I had a blind date at a bar. I arrived first, grabbed a beer, and waited. He showed up. It wasn't late. Grabbed the beer, and we started talking. Things were great for the first 90 minutes or so. At about the time he's decided that he wants to see me again, he asks, "So, do you know any black people?" I respond with, "Yes. Some of my friends are black." He starts yelling about no racial mixing and some other messed up racist stuff. I Average American date. Story 16. I had met a guy online and everything seemed to go okay. We chatted and it turned out we had a lot in common. He wasn't a drinker, so we met at Starbucks for coffee. He seemed like a nice guy, friendly, and was definitely up there in second date territory. Suddenly he asked me if my melons were real or fake. It was so abrupt, I was more weirded out than anything. I didn't think that was a pertinent question, so I brushed it off. He went off on a 30-minute speech on how fake melons were a sin on girls and why they were the downfall of the female gender. I wondered how scared he was by implants, and he declared that if we wanted to embark on the relationship, I couldn't lie to him about my melons, because, everyone always makes long-term plans on the first date. I was about to duck out when he reached over to verify that mine were real. When I smacked his hand away, he got super offended and I booked it home. Texts of apology and a request for another day came up, but I ignored him. Thank goodness my following online encounter wound up on a more positive note. He tried to what? Story 17. I went on a date with someone from OkCupid and it seemed pretty normal. And I went on a second date and I was joking about how he could be some creepy dude from the internet and parked us out in the middle of an empty parking lot late at night to end me. And he brandished his weapon from his pocket. I was kind of freaked out for a moment and then he started laughing and saying that he was kidding and that he always carried a weapon on him. Not funny. Story 18. This didn't happen to me, but to a friend of mine. She started dating this guy she met online and the first couple of dates seemed great, from what she's told me. It started to get weird when he was super apprehensive about taking her to his house. After dating for about 3 months, he finally brought her to his house, and what she saw made me laugh like I never had before. This guy from floor to ceiling had the biggest Princess Diana memorabilia collection she's ever seen. Princess Diana posters, furniture, figurines, toilet seat covers, you name it. It probably had her face on it. After seeing this, it weirded her out so much that she broke off the relationship. I feel bad for her, but to this day, it makes me laugh. God forbid a guy is a fan of someone. Story 19. I met this guy through some friends. We texted. He seemed nerdy and cute and fun and not terrifying in any way. I was wrong. We went on one date and it was great. Totally normal banter and goofy times were had, so I kissed him goodnight. He asked me inside immediately, but I did not go in because he lived with his parents. I live in a different city than this and visit where he is often, and periodically for about 4 or 5 months now, I get texts from him in the middle of the night, lamenting about how he wants to fool with me, how he's in love with me, and gives me ultimatums like, either we do this and date or I'll never speak to you again. Obviously, I take the latter, but then this happens next week too. This has been happening to me for almost 5 months now, 2 times a week and about 15 to 20 text messages each time. It's exhausting. Story 20. Not my story, but my best friend's story that's so ridiculous, it's amazing. So I met my fiancé on Tinder, which inspired my best friend, Alicia, to give Tinder a go. She started chatting with this guy who seemed nice and normal, worked in finance, had his own house and car, etc. So she agreed to meet up for a dinner date. As always, she told me if she texted me asking for help, I'd call her up and act like one of my family members passed away and she had to leave right then and there. So she turns up to this nice restaurant, all dressed up, and he's nicely dressed, but very different looking than his picture. Now, Alicia has generously proportioned herself, but make sure her photos clearly show this. His photos, however, had to have been at least 2 or 3 years old. He orders the 2 of them a bottle of wine and they order dinner. He finishes his glass of wine before the obligatory breadsticks even come out, then pours himself another glass of wine and tries to play a drinking game with her. Never have I ever style, in the middle of the restaurant was just the 2 of them. Alicia laughs it off and goes to the bathroom where she frantically calls me, telling me I need to save her. So I called her 5 minutes later and saved her. She called me from her car, having been accompanied to the car park by him, then driving away as fast as possible from a random street. She said when she said she needed to leave, he finished off her wine as quickly as possible and then realized he'd forgotten his wallet and she had to pay for the whole thing, even though he had told her he'd pay for it all beforehand. She always offers to pay for half of her dinner dates, but when someone explicitly says it's their treat and they'll pay, you kind of don't expect to end up paying for the whole thing. Makes me so glad I'm gay. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 21. Very briefly dated a guy in high school who, after 1 week of a 90% online relationship, started talking about our eventual marriage and what a goddess of a stay-at-home mom I'd be. I never even mentioned staying at home and had a pretty clear idea of my career plans. We'd only gone on 1 decent date to the cinema before this started. The heck? I'd known him for a few years before relenting and finally dating him, but he seemed mostly normal up until then. Definitely escalated quickly and totally weirded me out. Story 22. Super awesome first date. Went for drinks, had a great connection, and had an amazing time. The next couple dates weren't as electric, but still fun. On the third, I was finding I was really having to do the legwork in conversation. Anyways, we do the thing. Partway through, we realized there's a bit of red liquid from me, which is not uncommon, and while it hasn't happened to me heaps, it's something I've experienced before. So no big dealio for me. I'm down to keep going. He, on the other hand, freaks out. Wide-eyed, he kept repeating, "What? This is so weird. It's just so weird." Like, dude, have you met a woman before? Sometimes there's red liquid there. No big deal. He's beside himself about this. Just can't get over it all. Okay, so we calm down, chat a bit, and he leaves. A couple days later, he texts me, "Hey, I had a great time the other night. We should do it again sometime." Really? Huh? Because I got a completely different impression from you. If a dude is gonna freak out in a bad way about my lady bits just doing their thing, then he ain't my kind of dude. Cut him some slack, maybe it was his first time. Story 23. I stupidly fooled around with this guy I worked with once. I knew he had a bit of a crush on me and I thought it was cute, but I made it very clear to him it was a one-time thing only and nothing serious was going to come of it. A week later, I was out at a gig and he wouldn't stop texting me. I told him I was at a gig and asked if he could please leave me alone to enjoy the night. The week after that, another girl I worked with told me she's messaged him that night, and in response, he basically said he was thinking of ending himself. She called him up and he yelled at her on the phone and mentioned my name. I left the job not long after that, never really spoke again. Story 24. This one is pretty mild, but I didn't actually make it through the first day. We were at a coffee shop attached to a bookstore and everything started out pretty well. It was a little quiet, shy or nervous, I assumed, but I coaxed some conversation out of him. After drinks, we started wandering around the bookstore, discussing our various interests. He asks me if I like Lord of the Rings. It's the first non-prompted question he'd asked. I say, "Oh yeah, I like it. My favorite movie is the first one. The other two got a bit repetitive with the battles." He's silent for a moment. "Lord of the Rings are my favorite movies ever, and the books as well." "I read the books too," I reply conversationally. "They weren't bad, but not my favorites." He's silent again. "Lord of the Rings is very important to me. I'm a little confused now. I like them, they're just not my all-time favorite thing, you know?" Another long pause. The stare is oddly intense. "Lord of the Rings is very important to me, and it's very important to me that you like it too." "Well, you know," I say slowly, a bit cautious. "We don't have to have exactly matching interests to be compatible, and I do like Lord of the Rings. I'm just not super passionate about it." That strangely cutting stare intensifies. "It's really important to me that you like Lord of the Rings." At this point, I simply shrugged and resumed browsing, but let me tell you, I wrapped that date up fast and lost his number immediately. Luckily, my lack of intense passion for Lord of the Rings was enough for a turnoff that he didn't try for a second date. I don't know exactly what kind of bullet to dodge there, but I definitely dodged something. You dodged a man with hobbies. God forbid a man has hobbies. Story 25. My spouse once met a guy online. The first day was standard though, and for a second date, he invited her over for dinner. He had set the table with places for him and her and a handful of his favorite stuffed animals. So they sat and ate as though at a 5-year-old's tea party. There were many more plush toys looking on from the furniture and shelves. Another fellow, at first outwardly normal, began picking and eating flowers as they walked along. When asked if he knew about edible varieties, he confessed that he did not. He just liked trying them out and he's still alive and even later met his kid, so he managed to beat evolution. Remember, gals, have been out on your online dates. Tell a friend where you're going and bounce if things go sideways. Story 26. Pretty soon after ending a long-term relationship, I started getting to know this guy on Tinder. He seemed sweet, and our first few dates were actually pretty wonderful. It seemed like he was trying to do the whole rom-com date style. Snowy walks in town ending in snowball fights and hot cocoa, etc. About a month into seeing him, I left for Australia where I was contracted for work for 4 months. During that time, one of my close friends from high school ended himself. I told the guy he got upset because I wouldn't Skype him, saying things that, direct quote, I was wallowing too much and that ending it all was stupid and only cowards did it. I stopped talking to him for a while. I ended up speaking to him one more time once I was more comfortable with the events that unfolded. He then proceeded to tell me I'd be more attractive if I wore more makeup and changed my naturally curly hair for straight hair and to wear jeans instead of my normal skirts and dresses. Needless to say, I wasn't interested in a relationship with him anymore. He still messages me on Facebook trying to get me to text him. What a schmuck. Sounds like we got a psychopath. Story 27. Okay, so it wasn't exactly a date, but long story short, the conversation switched from astronomy and black holes to how much he'd like to harm a kid. In vivid description. Because the kid called him weird. I spent the entire weekend explaining the various reasons seniors in high school can't stop mouthy little kids a good 50 pounds out of their weight class for something as trivial as name calling, especially since the lad in danger was known for his rude and forthright mannerisms. A man-child. Story 28. Met him in OkCupid. He seemed funny and kind of cute. Went to see a movie and had dinner, which was okay, and made plans to stay at his house the next week. His house was filthy, like it had never been cleaned, and he made me feel so uncomfortable. I told him after I left that we should just be friends, and he flipped out and threatened to come find me, that he was going to harm himself. He called me over and over, so I put a block on his number and blocked him on everything. Story 29. I get back to my apartment. He drove. We're sitting in the parking lot, and he asks me to grab his phone out of the glove department. I open it up, and there's a gun and 2 knives. I begin getting out of the car, and he gets out as well. I assumed he was walking me to my door, but then he follows me inside and sits down on the couch. He asks me to sit next to him and begins twirling my hair and singing a lullaby. I told him that I had some plans later and thanked him for the date, to which he responded, "Perfect. I'd love to go to the get-together with you." I then panic and tell my mom to call me and ask me to come over. She calls and I tell him I have to go. He says I'll drive. I let him know that it's a family emergency and that I should go alone. He seems rather angry about this, but says okay. We both go outside and I drive away. My roommate texts me and asks what's going on because he's sitting in the parking lot outside on the hood of his car. I waited at my parents' house for an hour and he's still sitting in our parking lot, but in his car now. I ended up spending the night at my parents' house and he slept in his car waiting for me. I came home the next morning and he's awake and sitting in the hood of his car again and asks me if I'm ready to get breakfast together. Well, what happened next? Are you free from the guy? Blink twice if you're okay. Story 30. We met on Tinder. It was my first time meeting someone from Tinder, so I figured a blonde guy in a bow tie was a good choice. We went to see a movie and then got something to eat. We had a great conversation the entire night. Fast forward to the end of the night and he offers to drop me off at my apartment. I let him. I thank him for walking me home and he asks if he can come up. I politely decline, but then he responds with, "I don't want to have intimacy with you. I just want to stroke your back with a paintbrush until you fall asleep, like my mother used to do for me." Unclear if he had a paintbrush on him or if I was going to have to provide it. I did not invite him up. God forbid a guy wants to stroke her back with a paintbrush as a hobby. God forbid a guy has hobbies. Story 31. His parents introduced me to him when we were 14. He was a popular kid, honor student, and on his high school football team. He was quite good looking and I was flattered when he showed an interest in me. He became progressively more creepy and started doing things like following me around, always staring at a particular area, trying to go into my room when I was sleeping and making inappropriate comments. There was one incident where we were at a Starbucks and he offered to buy me a drink. I said no, as I knew he would take this as an invitation. He physically blocked my way to the counter multiple times and almost grabbed my arm, but stopped when he saw people staring at him. After I rejected him enough times for him to give up, he found out about my Asperger's syndrome diagnosis. How does he know my medical information? I told my 9-year-old brother to say, "Lol, autistic idiot," for candy. I forced him to watch an episode of South Park which said that all autistic people do inappropriate things in public and act stupid. I later reported him after finding out he was physically and emotionally mistreating my brother. What even? Story 32. Went on a really nice first dinner date. No red flags. Second date over coffee, we discussed more about our careers and training in science. He told me that he was very interested in the 21 grams theory and work by Duncan McDougall. If you're not familiar, 21 grams is the supposed amount of weight the body loses immediately after passing away. My date thought more data on this topic was required and believed the only reasonable way to perform this experiment would be to have row inmates volunteer to be weighed as they passed. Since this would violate ethics in the United States, these experiments would have to be performed elsewhere. It was absolutely serious and had clearly given this considerable thought. The whole thing gave me chills and I couldn't get home fast enough. He should volunteer. Story 33. We met at a bar. He was a bouncer and we hit off a bit, so I gave him a number. A few days later, we went on a date. It was pretty cool and we talked a lot. I'd mentioned I was in between jobs at the time, and so he asked about some of my skills and said he would keep his eyes peeled. A few days later, he calls me. Says he's found me the perfect job. He sets up the interview that'll pick me up and we'll get together. I politely declined because I don't believe in going with someone to an interview, and I requested the address of this place so I could do some research in the company to prepare. They wouldn't give me the info nor the name of the interviewer or the company. Nothing. My gut said something felt off, so I politely declined the assistance and got off the phone. 10 minutes later, he starts blowing up my phone. I left one single voicemail out of 22 calls and said that I absolutely must let him pick me up and that he'd be in trouble if I didn't. The next thing I know, it's 9:30 at night and he's banging on my door and windows, shouting, "I have to go with him." I called the police, but he was gone by the time they got there. I filed the report, and the officer told me he thinks it had to do with a cartel, because I was living on the border of Mexico or Texas at the time. Story 34. My friend has these stories, and I'll share my favorite of hers. So she was whistling at this guy, and he seemed to be reaching a point of excitement, right? He then asked, "Could I, finish inside?" She was totally taken aback because they weren't even being intimate, so it was super awkward. She responded with a firm, "Absolutely not." He then said, "Okay, well, could you turn to your side?" She did, thinking, all right, maybe he just wants a little space or something. But then the guy started to, well, let's just say he directed his actions toward her ear. She was bewildered. Of course, things going through her head are, is this normal? Do normal people do this? Do people enjoy this? And my friends and I could not contain our laughter at her poor situation. I love her and her stories. Okay. Story 35. Mine is definitely the boy who faked substance coding. I agreed to go out on a date with him as he was very handsome and funny, but as soon as we were alone, he tried to take advantage of me and I had to literally throw him off of me. I told him that because of this, I no longer had any feelings for him. He got extremely emotional and said he was going to end it all, then ran away to a park. My friend found him, who didn't know what happened, and called me saying he was shaking really bad and that he said he had retched several times and that he had drank 4 or 5 hour energies and drank 2 bottles of cough medicine. Turns out he was faking it so I'd feel sympathetic towards him and only let it slip once I said I was going to call an ambulance. Worst day ever. Story 36. I had a guy spook after the 3rd date. He faked a week-long hospitalization and faux illness to get out of having dinner and could only text in between rest. For someone so commitment-phobic, he really tried to commit to the bit, even initially sending me photos of him sick in a bed and sending me updates. Anytime I offered to come visit, he'd shut it down. This is when I learned that as women grow older, they can smell male lies. Might have gone away with it if he didn't post to FB about how much he enjoyed the new Game of Thrones. Well, he was supposed to be internetless and hospitalized. He texted me the next day to tell me how he didn't want it spoiled or was excited to see when he got out. In hindsight, a true joy. Although it drove me nuts at the time because I was half aware how he was. I'm much less naive now, but he's still probably impotent and using younger girls as objects for his ego. The extent he tried to take the lie when I confronted him was seriously weird or pathetic. Story 37. We met online. He was charming and funny. We differed. He's conservative, I'm left of center, but not by much. Both divorced, heavily involved in our kids' lives. Understood my need, emotional, yes, but also safety and just plain single mom scheduling to move slowly. Things got weird when I learned he's a member of Oath Keepers. Wasn't familiar at the time, but my Google foo filled me in. He brings a firearm with him everywhere he goes. He stands me up for a 4th date. Apologizes profusely, gives appropriate explanation 45 minutes after he was supposed to be there. A week later, I found out he's still married when he's texting me photos of his trip with his kids and his ex-wife posts the same photos on Facebook, only with her not cropped out, and tags him. Conservative values my hind leg. Story 38. Not my story, and it wasn't a date, but I had a friend who worked at a bank in high school. There was a man who would come in and hit on the tellers once a week. The guy was also the parent of a classmate. After a while, he started getting really creepy. One day, he walks into the bank and waits in my friend's lane, even though she's busy and other lanes are open. He has a weird grin on his face. When she asks him what he needs, the guy pulls out 3 photos of her as a child and goes on and on about how she was an ugly duckling and how beautiful she is now. Only one of these photos was from a 10-year-old yearbook. The 2 others had no freaking idea how he got them. They were personal photos that were not on any social media or website. Just her playing in the yard as a kid. Long story short, she started shaking. Police were called. They declined to do anything since the guy was the parent of a classmate and said the photos were from a school trip. Her manager couldn't ban the guy from entering the building. She quit that job a few weeks later. I just Googled the guy's name and he's now a registered offender. Went through her lane almost weekly for 2 years before the photo incident. The cops didn't do anything, even if those photos weren't supposed to be with him. Story 39. First day was normal. Beach, ice cream, taught me how to skate, all that stuff. Eventually started dating and then he told me all the details of his life, starting with the alcohol and substance misuse. Told me about all the stuff he's done and he also told me about all the people he's harmed. All the stupid antics, all the experiences due to hanging out with a horrible crowd. I felt sorry for him. I genuinely did, and he felt guilty about all the things he did because he was in a genuinely bad place. However, I didn't know his life was that messed up. He told me bits and pieces on our first day, but nothing too personal, so when I found out, I was shocked and felt quite betrayed. I'm 100% against most of these things for private reasons, so it was really hard for me to accept it. However, for 2 years, I stood by him and watched him go through withdrawals, relapses, the whole lot. And now he's completely sober and works a full-time job. He doesn't rely on deals or any job on the streets. He works as an electrician and he's starting to fully experience life the way it's meant to be experienced. We're very much in love and I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with him. Wow, an unexpected good ending. Story 40. I'm a fairly tall girl, 5'9.5", and I was asked out by a guy that was shorter than me, 5'7". I don't discriminate and have no problem with shorter dudes. Most of the guys I've dated have been about my height or slightly shorter or taller, and he seemed to dig the fact that I was taller than him, would compliment me on my long legs and such. On our third date, I decided to wear these new platform sandals I'd bought. On our previous 2 dates, I'd worn flat shoes. Well, the guy went Mussolini on me, told me to go back home and change my shoes, accused me of trying to humiliate and emasculate him. I was caught totally off guard. I'd been so laid back and normal in the first 2 dates, I had to ask if he was joking. It wasn't. I ended it there and went home. Story 41. Not a first date. Met a guy during a college summer program while in high school. Started dating long distance. Ended up at the same university. I chose my goal school. He followed me. So the long distance ends and we still can't go on a date. The guy's allowed to go out with friends, but has to have proof for his parents and has to check in via Skype and have dinner with his parents otherwise. So I tried for a coffee day in between classes. Dude literally tried to serenade me in public, which may have seemed sweet, but he wouldn't let me go to my class until I finished the ballad. That, coupled with some stuff I'd let slide because of the distance, tipped the nope scale. Men and women, what made you not want a second date with someone? I was at the mall one summer day, hanging out with some friends. I saw this guy who looked like a friend of mine, so I walked up to him only to find that he was not that friend. He was cute. We introduced ourselves, exchanged pleasantries, gave me his beeper number. I'm old, and we planned to go get coffee sometime. I was a hot, spooky chick, and he was a hot, spooky dude. The day arrived. It turns out he worked at a Red Lobster down the road from my house, so I walked over there to meet him after his shift ended. We went to see The Craft in the second-run theater. We held hands, kissed during the movie. We went to get coffee after, and we chatted. What year are you? Going to be a junior this fall. Cool. I didn't go to college. College? Oh God, how old are you? So that's the story about how two strangers vastly over or underestimated each other's ages. I thought he was 17 to 18. He thought I was around 20. I was 15, and he was 25. He took me right home, and we didn't go out again. That must have scared the crap out of him. Story 2. We'd been to lunch a few times, but this was the first real romantic date. We met in biology class in college. She was gorgeous and smart and had a smile that could melt diamonds. I was in a group project with her and took her to lunch, and she confessed she had a crush on me. So we kissed before going back to class and made plans for a date and went out that night. And we had a wonderful time. Until about the time she asked me what my deal breaker for dating was. As in, what trait would someone have that would immediately make me break it off? I said something like I wouldn't date a racist. Someone who had a sociopathic streak or was mean, stuff like that. She said that she could date all kinds of guys. Fat, skinny, black, white, it didn't matter. The one thing she could not abide, the one kind of guy that she absolutely, positively would never, ever be with, was a guy with a hairy back. I'm Iranian. The end. Razors exist. Story 3. Her boyfriend that I knew nothing about showed up. In high school, I went on a date with a girl I met through a friend. I'd been texting a while and seemed to really hit it off. She brought a girlfriend because we'd been talking, but I'm still a relatively unknown guy. I get it. Guy crashes the date, chatting casually with everyone, and offhandedly refers to the girl I'm there to see as his girlfriend. I was too awkward, shocked, and hurt to say anything and left soon after. We texted later, and when I asked about it, she said, he probably just said good friend. That quote has stuck with me. Maybe something else was going on, and it was someone she had tried to get rid of, and my autistic self missed some cues, but at the time, it felt like a really bad cover. She's probably just a dummy. Story 4. It was my first and only blind date, which a mutual friend of ours set up. She arrived and parked in a disabled space. Got out of the car, telling me she uses her NAN's disabled pass, which didn't sit well with me, but carried on anyway. We went bowling and to dinner. She was really rude to the service staff in both places, which I found embarrassing and uncomfortable. Cut the dinner short, paid, left, and never saw her again. Story 5. She was on her phone 60% of the date. Met with her for drinks, following a greeting or a smile or hug. Her head went back down to her phone. Asked if she wanted to grab something from the bar and didn't lift her head when she told me what she wanted, nor did she come to the bar with me. Okay, whatever. I was definitely in a state of mind at the time that I just wanted to try things out. gain experience, roll with the punches. The other 40% of the time was basically her talking about herself. That I can bear with. Not great, but bearable. It happens. That's part of the idea, to get to know the other person. But most of that was about her crappy ex and how terrible the breakup was. Sadly, no back and forth or basic conversation. Definitely got out of there politely and soon. Never looked back. To be clear, no heartbreak on my end. Purely just a bad date. Happily with someone now. Well, I'm happily single. Am I happy? Story 6. She criticized absolutely everything. The car I was driving, clothes I was wearing, cologne I chose. We were supposed to go bowling, dinner, and then drinks. When an attendant came over to ask if we wanted anything, I ordered my snacks and asked if she wanted anything. You mean you don't know? What kind of date is this? Halfway through our game, she mentioned I was bringing up the wrong conversation topics. Thankfully, my brother called me out of the blue asking to borrow some fishing gear, and I played it as work calling me in. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. Story 7. I met a girl at work who decided to invite me over to her house to hang out. Everything was cool, until I went to the bathroom. The bathroom was an absolute wreck. It hadn't been cleaned in maybe years. There was scum and hair everywhere. I could have dealt with all that, but when I raised the lid to take a whiz, I saw poop floating in some water and with a piece of toilet paper over it. She had just been in there a bit before myself. I flushed, whizzed, and then called it a night. I would have gone out the window. Story 8. This happened last week. When we got to the good old, what do you do for a living, she straight up tried to sell me in on her MLM scheme. When I politely noted I wasn't interested, but I'm happy to go back to our previous discussions, she got argumentative in the good old salesperson losing a client kind of way. When it was clear the mood was ruined and we weren't going anywhere from there, I stood up, paid for our drinks at the counter, and got out. Bonus points for some of my friends, coincidentally sitting at the table behind us. Her. I could see them. And giving her weird looks as she was ranting about the life-changing opportunity that pretty much solidified my thoughts. Story 9. I had more in common with a chaperone she brought to the ice cream shop and didn't seem to have anything to say that wasn't as a godly person. Like, fine, you brought someone to make sure I wasn't a creeper. I understand that. But when you make it very clear that it's your youth pastor acting as the chaperone and invite him to sit at our table, then say nothing until the pastor feels bad enough to break the silence to talk to me, maybe you don't cry and ask why I don't want a second date? That was my first ever date in my life. We'd spent about 2 hours talking the day before the date and really hit it off. No indication of the church stuff until she walks in with a pastor. I think bringing him was her choice, but I'm not sure. Either way, she was fully into the church stuff and asked me after our date if I wanted to come to church with her. And kept asking and asking and asking. I think she was trying to get me to join the church more than she wanted to date me because I saw her in a church group later in the year, rather aggressively asking people to come and throwing pamphlets into people's arms. And a female friend of mine had a similar experience with a guy from the group, and the same youth pastor. Story 10. My time to shine. Went on a date with a guy, who I've dubbed PowerPoint Guy. He arrived at our first date, coffee, with a literal presentation of non-negotiable demands he required from a future partner, including, but not limited to, must be housewife, produce him 2 boys and a girl, in that order, gender specified, not work or desire a career, move 500 miles away to live in an acreage in his parents' house, like with them also living there, not having any male friends, but he also wanted someone who was open to sleeping with whoever he chose so he could watch. The list goes on. He didn't ask me a single question about my life or interests, just spat out this list of stuff and talked about himself for about 2 hours, at which point I politely bailed. Props to this guy for knowing what he wants, but PowerPoint Guy did not land a second date with me. I'm surprised she stayed for 2 hours. Story 11. Arrived 40 minutes late with no text to say he would be. Turned up with his laptop and said he needs to do some work and gave me some cash to get him coffee and something I want. I was like, okay, sure, and stood in the queue watching him as he put on his headphones and opened his laptop. I came back with the drinks and he said he just needs to finish this and took a call. I just sat there for another 40 minutes with zero conversation and him typing or chatting away. This was a Saturday, by the way, and he scheduled the time. After he finished, he said let's go to a bar and get a proper drink. We had a chat and I tried to get to know him, but he was being a schmuck. He ordered the drinks and then started having a go at me for not offering to pay and went on a rant about double standards. To be honest, I was still mad about waiting around for 90 minutes and was not in the mood to pay for his drink or see him again. You should have bolted the moment he pulled out a laptop. Story 12. Matched with a guy on Tinder in 2014 while I was in grad school and new to the city I was living in. He seemed cool enough and lived in a small town about 45 minutes outside my city. He offered to take me out for dinner and I agreed and said I would meet him at dinner, in regard to my own safety. He insisted on picking me up and showed up with a liter of Fireball and sat down on my couch and started pouring shots of it for me and my roommate. He seemed like a genuinely nice guy, just oddly misguided in that I was not interested in binge drinking Fireball before dinner. He ended up drinking nearly all of it and tried to hook up with me. When I rejected him, he wanted to drive home despite being completely hammered. I forced him to sleep on my couch and locked the door to my room. I never spoke again, but he did try to add me on Snapchat about 4 years later. Story 13. The dude I had texted and bonded over the fact that we both liked drawing and decided a fun way to get to know each other on our first day would be to bring our sketchbooks and share what kinds of things we draw. I brought along my little moleskin sketchbook. He brought an accordion file filled with one-page comics. He then proceeded to read every single comic out loud to me with character voices. There were dozens of comics. His enthusiasm was fine. It was the fact that he never even asked me to share my art with him and instead made sure I was his audience the entire evening, instead of an active participant in the conversation. Later in the day, while we were taking a walk, he pointed out a park bench and told me a story of him and his ex-girlfriend aggressively making out in it in the middle of the day, while surrounded by picnicking families. No thanks. Some people just don't have social skills at all. Story 14. I went to this guy's house and we made pizza, drank wine, and watched a movie. I was nice and intoxicated or full by the time we started watching the movie. He picked the movie. I forgot the name, but it was the older movie with Angelina Jolie's dad, and that guy found that old town and got essayed. The guy who I'm chilling with goes, "Wow, what would you do in that situation?" I'm like, dude, I don't know. That's a weird question. Then after that scene, he leans in for a kiss, then just stops and sits back up like nothing happened. It was time for me to go home. He drove and he ran over some traffic cones on the way back. I thought we were for sure going to get in an accident. That made me not want a second date. Story 15. When I first met him, he kept standing way too close to me and his breath smelled like cigarettes. Throughout our date, he would start looking around and be clearly listening to surrounding conversations every time it was my turn to speak. Like the moment he would stop babbling, he would be looking everywhere to listen to anything but me. At one point, he sneezed into his bare hand, looked at it and said, "Ugh," then wiped it on his pants. An hour or so into this, he interrupts me mid-sentence, a sentence that he was paying zero attention to, of course, and says, in what sounded like an attempt at a sexy voice, "Hey, want to get out of here?" I, seeing it was the late hour of 9 p.m., still said, "Oh, hey, well, it's getting late. I should get home." I was grateful when I didn't hear from him for a week, before he texted me asking to hang out again while I was at an event and couldn't really respond right away. He gave a snarky follow-up an hour later because I hadn't responded, which I thought was hilarious because of the hypocrisy. Anyhow, I told him I didn't think it would work out, and that was that. Story 16. First day was uneventful. We talked about what we did, our backgrounds, upbringing, etc. Vapid, nebulous stuff. This was late afternoon Saturday. We parted and I went to a pub to meet some friends. The following morning I slept late and opened my phone to a barrage, around 4, of messages from my date. She's listing all the things I should have done or said better, what she found annoying, etc. I'm looking through it pretty damned hurt. Start to write what I thought, wow, there's no need for that. Just say thanks and bye. But remember not to text when emotions run high. That afternoon, another message. When do you want to try again? Think it could be fun? This time I did respond. Never. Story 17. She talked about her ex-girlfriend of a few months for about half the date, then proceeded to explain to me how she essayed her ex when her ex didn't want to have intimacy with her yet. I kept asking to leave. My things were in her car, but she kept saying that she was having a good time and that she loved that I was such a good listener. I texted my sister to come get me, and when I informed my date of this, she got upset with me. It made me tell my sister to go back home because she wanted to drive me home instead. She even texted me the next morning and told me she had a great time and wanted to see me again. I've never blocked someone so quickly. Story 18. She kept talking about how life was supposed to be enjoyed to the maximum. Basically, how she spent lavishly on expensive Italian, French, or Japanese dinners and trips, making her constantly broke and constantly borrowing money from other people to sustain her lifestyle. She considered it classy. I considered her delusional. Unsurprisingly, I ran for the hills as fast as my legs could carry me. No, thank you. Story 19. To start, he was nearly 30 minutes late to the restaurant. Blamed traffic for being so late. Even though we don't live in a city, he was a little intoxicated when he turned up, but I can understand if he was a little nervous beforehand. I ordered a meal and he ordered 3 beers for himself. After he downed a few, he then proceeded to tell me I was a 7 out of 10, and to get to a 10, I should get plastic surgery so I can be a model. I told him repeatedly that I was happy with the way I looked, but he kept going on and on about what I should get done. After I'd finished eating, I said I'm going to pay for my meal then head home. I wanted to go to the bar and convinced me to go with him. I ordered a drink, then turned around to see him leaning over a couple of young ladies who looked pretty uncomfortable, so I put my drink down and left. I sent him a text the next day saying it isn't going to work and blocked him. 1 week later, I get a call from an unknown number, and it's his mom. She tells me about how he came to visit her and told her all about me, and how happy she is that her boy has finally found someone, and invites me to dinner, which I turned down. Story 20. Different guy. I told him I'm not much of a kisser even before the date, that I show intimacy in other ways. The day had been great. Then at the end, he was catching the train, and just before he jumped on, he leaned in to kiss me, which I dodged, and he went straight on the train. Because he left it in an awkward time, just as he was leaving, I didn't have a chance to hug him or do anything else. Rather than responding maturely, he sent me loads of insults over Snapchat, and 2 days later claimed his mate sent them and he wanted to see me again. Story 21. Went out with this young lady who thought it was fun to bash me all night. I have a good sense of humor, but about the 5th time she called me stupid, I was done. She was boring and full of herself. I finally asked her what the heck her problem was, and she responded that she was just joking and I was sensitive. I finished the date. I could tell it was awkward for her, but luckily I don't have problems with confrontation. I told her she was just being sensitive and got over it. I took her home and didn't get out of the car, open her door, or walk her to her door. I think another issue with her was when she found out I cut grass as a second job. This was the late 80s. She mocked that and turned her nose up at it. When I responded I made over $25 an hour doing that, she looked at me shocked but still found it embarrassing. This is tame for most of the responses here. I dated around a lot when I was younger. I only went on one blind date. I never went out with someone I didn't get to know at least a little. I couldn't imagine how I would deal with some of the mental cases reported here. Story 22. I actually feel bad that I wasn't honest with why I didn't follow up with her, but a while ago I went on a date with a girl who was seemingly very sweet and very attractive. Probably out of my league. We had a good time, hanging out at a bar or restaurant, and we liked a lot of similar things, and she was studying to be a nurse and had an internship. Cool. But then she told me that part of her internship was helping with schizophrenic patients as well as other mentally handicapped individuals. And one thing she thought was hilarious, ways to mess with them. She told me she liked to mess with the schizophrenics by telling them things like, "Yeah, I really am out to get you," and things of that nature. When she said this, I just said that my grandmother was heavily schizophrenic and it's a very serious and harsh problem and I felt bad for them. It ended the conversation, but the date proceeded for a bit longer before ending and we parted ways. She definitely wanted to do it again, but I just couldn't after that. Not sure if she just kind of said something she thought was goofy at the moment and didn't actually do those things, but either way, it was a deal breaker for me, for sure. I also had no actual clue where she worked, so before anyone asks, I couldn't have really reported her or anything like that. Story 23. We've been talking on Tinder for like 6 months. Date went really well. He was super sweet and chatty. Right at the end, he said, "I thought your profile pictures were beautiful and you're even more beautiful in person." I was like, wow, that's a lovely thing to say. Until he finished it with, "And your melons are even bigger than I thought. Are they still perky or do they sag?" The waitress was standing next to us. We both just stared at him, then I asked for the bill, paid it in full, and left. Some men are dense, but some men are just very talented at ruining things. Story 24. I recently went on a date with someone who's a good guy but unloaded on me emotionally for longer than an hour. I tend to present as a good listener, and this happens to me sometimes. I appreciated what he was sharing, but he didn't ask me questions in return, and I didn't have space in the conversation for it to be an equal exchange. Though I tried. If it starts to feel like I'm your therapist and it's not a two-way conversation, that's a deal breaker. How many dates have you been on? Comment down below and don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 25. All he kept talking about the entire day was how, in the future, self-driving cars would be way better than people could ever drive, and this would be the ideal way. I questioned that idea, not really knowing enough about the subject to have an informed opinion, but just going off what he was saying, and he made me regret it for the next hour, and he insisted that no matter how good a driver I was, a computer would always be better. He wouldn't shut up about self-driving cars the entire time. To this day, I hate the whole idea of it, mostly because of him. His name wasn't Elon, was it? Story 26. Tinder date 3 to 4 years back, wouldn't stop showing or talking about her knife collection, which was easily 400 plus knives. He even whipped out her favorite butterfly knife in a restaurant full of kids to show me and started flicking it around her hand. After the entire date of her being extremely handsy with me, I decided to touch her back for the first time, after 3 hours, by putting my arm around her shoulder while we were sitting down with her hand resting on my thigh. Her immediate reaction was to scream at the top of her lungs, "What the heck are you doing?" This happened at a train station in Germany, which was very empty to my luck. I was confused, dazed, looking around because I knew what it looked like. She then just says, "Oh, sorry." That was a knee-jerk reaction. Sorry if I hurt you. Anyways, I was saying, my favorite game is probably Mass Effect 3 or Zelda. She carries on the conversation as if nothing happened. I'm in disbelief. I'm scared. I want out of here. Waiting for the train that was coming in 12 minutes felt like centuries. Train arrives, immediately jumps in, doesn't even say goodbye, no eye contact. As the door is closing, she says, "Hope I get to see you again soon." I lock myself into the train's bathroom and fall to my knees. Holy crap, I thought I was going to get hurt. Not only did she not get a second date, I didn't date at all for the next 3 years. Man was traumatized. Story 27. A lady I knew used to hassle me about taking her out one night. I was friends with her sister at the time, and she said her sister was keen to go out with me. Even her mother wanted me to take her out, so we arranged to go for a drink. She turns up with another guy who just sits there and says nothing the whole time. After about 30 minutes of awkwardness, she says to her friend, "Right, shall we make a move?" And off they go. Fast forward 3 or 4 years, and we're at her sister's wedding. Girl who took out started complaining at me for not taking her out again. I just smiled and walked away. Story 28. I went to see this band play at a record store with a girl from a business class. As the guy is counting change, she laughs and goes, "This guy definitely isn't in business school." Directly in front of him. I gave her a brief look of disgust and continued with the band. For the rest of the night, she scanned through records while I danced to the band in the other room. I think she knew at the moment as well that we were incompatible, mainly because she was so disrespectful and I didn't entertain it at all. Gave her a ride home after, but we definitely never went on a second date. Story 29. It wasn't the first date, but the second. She and I hung out once, and things were pretty cool. We decided to hang out a second time. While we hung out, she told me about being divorced twice and essentially said was looking for a new father for her son who was removed from her care. Keep in mind we had talked off and on for 3 months prior to ever meeting up, and she had never mentioned that she had a kid or had been married. I was only 19 at the time. Couldn't have dodged that bullet any better. Story 30. Met a guy on Tinder who seemed nice and ended up going for lunch and a movie. He said he would pay for lunch and said I'll pay for the movie and popcorn as I had a voucher to use for my birthday. I meet him, and within 30 seconds, I realize he has an intellectual disability. He told me straight away that he had lied and his friend had been the one messaging me as he couldn't read or write very well. I'm not a schmuck, and as everything was paid for, and I wanted to see the movie, I still went with him. It looked like I was his carer taking him for an outing. Lies and deception, never a good start. Story 31. Met a girl on a dating site. Chatted for about 2 weeks, got along pretty well. She invited me to come to her place for a date. When I get there, there's a U-Haul truck outside. Turns out she's in the middle of packing up and moving to another state and just wanted help with the heavy lifting. She hadn't mentioned any of this in our conversations. At first, I thought maybe it was a roommate moving out or something like that. When she made it clear she was the one moving, I just said, "Well, good luck with her move then," and got the heck out of there. Story 32. Second meeting with a guy who had agreed on an FWB situation. First meeting was fine. No red flags, but we didn't do more than Netflix or making out. I'm a nurse and had worked the night shift. Got home at 8 a.m. and we had previously arranged that he'd come over for a little something before I went to sleep for the day. He showed up completely disheveled and half awake, saying he stayed up all night so he could sleep with me all day. This immediately irritated me because first of all, it was weird, and second, he hadn't asked if it was okay prior, and he wasn't okay with me. Before I could tell him he couldn't stay, he went straight to my room, laid on my bed, and passed out. I'm annoyed and exhausted. It took me like 15 minutes to wake him up, and then he proceeded to try and initiate with me while half asleep. He smelled like he hadn't showered in days and had slathered on baby powder scented deodorant to mask the smell. The sloppy behavior and odor were both repulsive, and I knew immediately there was no way I could ever feel attracted to this person again. Story 33. Met outside the bar. It was summer and I was wearing a miniskirt and a t-shirt, casual or nice. We went inside, sat close to the bar and split nachos, and the conversation ran the gamut. Touched on politics, his previous job, movies, poker, which happened to be on TV and something that he did in his spare time. Apparently, his friend was in a tournament that was being televised. It was pleasant enough. I wasn't totally feeling it, but felt the conversation was flowing nicely from topic to topic and appreciated that. He left to go to the men's room, came back and proceeded to comment on my skirt and asked me if I was wearing any garments, then asking me what color and type I was wearing. I didn't respond, but commented how we'd gone from all these topics to now talking about my garments, and he would not divert from that topic. He left, and he insisted on walking me to my car and also asked that I drive him to his car, which was in a parking lot. I deliberately parked in the lane of the parking lot, which was one-way and circular, as it would mean someone would eventually need to honk to get past. He tried taking advantage of me as I held my hands up like I was in a bank robbery stick-up and said, "I'm uncomfortable." And then someone drove up behind and I said, "Oh, gotta move." And he had barely closed the door when I took off. Story 34. I told the guy that my friend who texted me while on a date has been a bit down lately, overworked and tired, which led into having spurs of depression. My date laughed and said that depression isn't a real thing and my friend just needed to get some. When I tried to explain to him that depression is real because it's a chemical imbalance in your brain and it's an illness of an organ, just like any other organ can get sick, he said something like, it's all fake. You just need a little sunshine and fresh air. Look at me. I'm not depressed. Turns out he's not depressed because you actually need a brain for it to get sick. Story 35. Oh my goodness, I've got a story for this one. Back in my extremely lonely, single for a long time, no standards phase, I went on a date with a dude. It wasn't my type, but I remember thinking, there's nothing wrong with him. Types are bogus, just go on a date with him. It could be great. Long story short, it wasn't. We went to a Tex-Mex restaurant. I suggested it, so I was more than prepared to pay. I ordered an enchilada, second cheaper item on the menu, and he got some nachos. I thought things were going well, but he started complaining about how food is expensive and that, of course, he was expected to pay. I told him I was okay to cover stuff, paid at the end of the meal, and we left, but he still complained about some of my enchiladas. We run into a friend of his as we're walking out to the car park, and he angles his body so I'm behind him, almost like he's hiding me. Okay, weird, but not so bad. Then he asks if I'd like to go for a drive, and I say, sure, where to? And he tells me he's got a special spot. So we're in the car and driving for about 45 minutes. I'm not panicking because he seems harmless, if just a bit rude. He spends the whole time talking about how much money he makes at his job. Then we finally pull off the highway, and I'm so excited to see what he has planned. We drove into a car wash. I adore automatic car washes, so I was honestly kind of keen. But then he parks in a self-service bay and takes another 30 minutes to hand wash his car while I just sit there, by myself, in his car. Then when he got back in, all he'd talk about was how much he loved his car, how fast and good it was. Okay, fair. Maybe it was a good car. I've got no clue. And people are allowed to like stuff. Then he did a burnout in the car park and laughed like a jackal. By this point, I was getting a little bit annoyed. So I suggested a nice park down the road from my house where we could talk. That way I'd have a quick getaway if I needed to leave. He tells me he knows a better one, his favorite park, and drives me to the most secluded park I've ever seen. It's behind a golf course and the river, and there's just a picnic table and some gravel, sad grass, and a rusty swing set. Again, making the best of a bad situation, I go to the swings and try to have fun. Casually, I ask why this is his favorite park. Maybe it has sentimental meaning to him? Maybe he likes the river? No, it's because at night, this park is well known for extracurricular nighttime activities, and he wanted to know if I was keen. Then he launched into a tirade about how he was such a nice guy and everyone on dating app we met on was shallow and wouldn't give him a chance. Considering he hadn't asked me anything about myself, complained about the restaurant, took a 45-minute joyride to hand wash his car, and then took me to the middle of nowhere to visit a sketchy park where he talked my ear off about how witches are frigid. No, I was not keen. Story 36. Alright, so this wasn't really a first date vibe, more like a one-night stand that she was trying to level up to more dates, but man, the red flags were waving like crazy. First off, she played the same record like 5 times straight because apparently I wasn't really listening. Then she wouldn't stop bringing up her ex, comparing me to him the whole time. We're making out and she suddenly stops to tell me to stop looking at her like a corn star, which honestly I have no idea what that even meant. Then during some super awkward sexy time, she drops the "I love you" bomb. Like, what? She also grilled me super hard about the books I read, which is cool to talk about, but she was so condescending about my taste in books and music. Then mid-sexy time, she just stops, rolls over, and says, "We're done." Which, hey, totally her call, but the way she did it was so abrupt. We did, finish things up in the morning, and then she got some stuff on her stomach, and just casually rolled over in bed and smeared it around. Lol. Oh, and her place was a total mess. She was cute, yeah, but it was just one red flag after another. Definitely had to say no to another hangout. Story 37. Met a girl on Plenty of Fish. She sent pics, she was attractive. We arranged to meet at a local restaurant. I text her when I get there and wait to walk in with her. She gets out of her car and is 3 times the size of her photos. I'm not handsome by any means, but this was pure false advertisement. I couldn't be mean about it, though. I just took her to the place and brought her dinner, and we had a great conversation. I may have even done a second day, but then she texted me to honestly tell me she had infections. Looking back, I think that is a super thing to come clean and reveal to someone. A lot of people do not, and that sucks. Infection and the size difference were it for me, though. I was out. Never did or will do a dating app again. Not for me. Story 38. I got in contact with a guy on Tinder once that seemed nice at first, but after a few hours of chatting, there were massive red flags. He wanted me to come over and didn't accept a no. This was a family day for me, and I wanted to spend time with him. To kind of understand me better in this situation, this was just 2 months after I quit a 5-year-long extreme toxic relationship. I was a massive people pleaser at the time. So when he didn't give up and made me feel guilty, said he already told his friends he has no time because he wants to meet up with me, that he's now lonely AF, and so on. I couldn't stand it anymore and drove the 45 minutes to his house at 11 p.m. to a guy I only knew a few hours and was a typical nice guy. Yep, I was that dumb. I packed a knife in my sleeve just in case. It was awful. Just talked about himself. Talked me over and tried to make me intoxicated so I couldn't drive anymore. I stayed 3 hours out of guilt and because I didn't want to be rude. Then I drove off and was so happy to be home again. I wrote him a message the next day that there won't be a second date, and he said something between the lines of, "We'll see." Bombed me with texts the next day, so I blocked him and he started stalking. Texted me insults every 2 days for half a year. He was the reason I uninstalled Tinder and stayed single another year. Enrico, if you ever see this, you're an absolute schmuck. Yeah, frick off, Enrico. Story 39. Not a day, but was at a bar a long time ago. This girl who I had worked with briefly was there making eyes at me all night. She walks over and is overly flirtatious. I think, damn, I may get some tonight. She invites me over to her house to go hot tubbing along with some of her friends. We get into the hot tub and 2 of her guy friends get in and she starts aggressively making out with both of them while just staring me down and making creepy eye contact the whole time. I did the old, well, it's time I hit the old dusty trail thing and left. I was there for maybe less than an hour. Everything about that situation was weird. Story 40. It was a friend of mine, so I expected him to be a decent person, but it started with him wanting to meet up at his place and not listening to me saying no. I told him that it was either meeting somewhere in the city or not meeting at all. So he proposed a bar somewhere and I decided to give him another chance. He just ordered a second beer when he proposed to go to his place after the beer. I said no. He said, "Nah, but come on. I bought a good bottle of wine and even practiced a piece on the piano especially for you." I felt like he was trying to make me feel guilty, so I felt even more uncomfortable and said no again. And then he started raising his voice, saying, "It's always the same with women. Why can't you just act normal? What is wrong with you?" At this point, the other people at the bar were looking at us, and it felt like he was trying to shame me into leaving with him. So I stood up, downed my beer, and left. Story 41. I went on a date that was set up by a mutual friend, and it was at the time a lot of women's marches were going on at the beginning of the Trump presidency. Things are going well. She's very into the women getting together thing, as am I. We're having some food and drinks, and she then proceeds to mock an overweight woman for what she's wearing, another for this and that, etc. It was such a what the heck moment. I'm the type of cat that is pretty understanding that we're all flawed people, but I have a hard time with that kind of hypocrisy. Story 42. She wouldn't make a single decision. We had a couple hours to wait for dinner. I asked if she wanted to get drinks at the bar and talk, or if she wanted to window shop and enjoy the Christmas lights. Heavily decorated part of the city. I don't care, whatever you want to do. After we sat, we looked at the menu and she puts hers down. I inquire what she had decided on. I don't know, I'll probably just order whatever you're getting. Asked what she did for fun. I shop. Sometimes I go to the casino. That's it. It was absolutely impossible to start a conversation with her. She asked me no questions the entire 4 hours we were on our date. Story 43. I was in Orlando on vacation. My brother was meeting me the next night, so I decided to explore the town on my own. I saw a comedy show at the Improv that evening and hopped on Tinder to see if anyone wanted to join me. My treat. I matched with this very cute girl and we started chatting. Religion came up early on and she mentioned being raised Mormon but no longer believing in it. Anyway, we decided to meet up for the show. While we were at a table waiting for it to start, chatting casually, religion came up again in a lighthearted way. Then I made a joke about how basically all religions are cults, especially Mormonism and Scientology, and she completely freaked out. She started yelling in the club about how she wasn't stupid and in a cult and that she was very serious about her Mormonism and how important it is to her. Then she demanded we leave. I simply said that I had already paid for the show and didn't want to leave. She stood there in disbelief and then stormed out. The guy at the table next to me leaned over and said I clearly dodged a bullet. I ended up hanging out with him and his wife, enjoying food and drinks. Mike Kaplan performed and was absolutely stellar. Highly recommend his comedy. Glad I stayed. Also, Mormonism is a cult. Just saying. Ooh, hot take. Story 44. I went out with a girl who was incredibly sarcastic and kind of rude. My whole family is pretty sarcastic and can often be perceived as rude, me included, so trust me when I say she took it to a whole new level. It wasn't fun, witty banter or playful ribbing. It was just a person I knew absolutely nothing about making fun of me. I played along the best I could, but honestly had a terrible time. When we were walking out, I said, "Well, I'm guessing you don't want a second date," thinking that we both thought the date went terrible. She looked at me shocked and kind of hurt and just said, "What?" I felt super freaking bad, honestly. She apparently thought it went really well and enjoyed the date. Some people just don't know how to read social cues. Story 45. I met a guy online who was a magician, like doing dangerous stunts kind. He bragged about doing shows for royalty. He bragged about how he didn't go to college like his sucker friends who pay student loans, and yet he made more money than them. He met at a British pub type spot, and he didn't drink alcohol or eat anything as he was vegan. He picked the place though. The kicker is, when we paid the bill and split it, he reached over, took the receipt, and pocketed it. I said, "You're using this as a tax write-off?" He's like, "Yeah, of course." I said, "Then maybe you could have paid for my drink then." He immediately looked uncomfortable. A few months later, I was reading a daily paper, and there he was, jumping out of a plane with his hands handcuffed. The article was a documentary about his magic. What's the weirdest thing that's happened to you on a first date? I posted this a while back in a thread about Tinder. That was a pretty spectacularly bad experience. I used the app and I matched with a girl who looked nice. We texted for a few days until we both had a free evening. I picked her up and she was very cute. Went to dinner at a Japanese steakhouse and had a good time. Even had some sake. She suggested we go back to my place. We stopped by her apartment to get her car and she wanted to grab some clothes. She followed me to my house and we kissed in my driveway for a bit before heading towards the house. I was feeling good about how the evening was going. So we were on my front porch and she said, "Ew, what's that?" I pointed to this baseball-sized toad that often hangs out there. It had been around for a couple of years. I explained that he was harmless and that I would sometimes knock bugs off my porch light for him to eat. She walked over to the toad, looked at me with intense eye contact, and then slowly stepped on it. At this point, I felt a mix of shock and anger. I asked her loudly, "What did you do that for?" To which she replied, "I wanted to make you mad so you'd be rough with me." I was speechless as I processed what I had just seen. I told her to leave my property. She became upset. We argued, and I sprayed her with a hose, and she finally left, only to show up 20 minutes later on my back deck. She had walked from down the road and pulled down some pickets from my fence to get into the backyard. The police came, she cried and talked her way out of trouble with them, and then she left. Talked her way out? Right. Story 2. Went on a double date when I was needed as a wingman for a friend. The girl who was going to me was really amazing and really hot. Her friend, not so much. Don't get me wrong, she was okay, but not okay. Anyway, we got to the restaurant the girls made a reservation at. They set up 2 separate tables on opposite sides of the place. Within 5 minutes of sitting down, this girl looks right into my eyes and says, "We should have kids with each other." Being I was wingman, I stayed the whole time and roughed out the date. My friend ended up marrying the girl. Story 3. My close friend's girlfriend set me up on a blind date with this girl that looked exactly like Amy Schumer. She seemed really nice, driven, and funny. While we were waiting on the check for the restaurant, she asked, "So, what kind of stuff are you into?" Started talking about how I play guitar in a band, and she immediately cuts me off saying, No, like, intimately. What are you into? What turns you on?" She said she was into some offbeat stuff, more on the teasing and roleplay side. I got the feeling she was into the whole dominant vibe, but she whistled me the minute we got back into my car, which was pretty cool. Story 4. We started our date at a restaurant, her suggestion, and then went to a hockey game next door for which she had gotten tickets from her boss. A good start. We then went to a few bars and I was driving her back to her place, perhaps not the best decision, with an expired vehicle tag. I was pulled over, which was frustrating. I was asked to perform sobriety tests, and I requested to be in front of the officer's car camera for this. He didn't like the suggestion, but I began walking towards his car to ensure it was recorded. He placed me under arrest while I was still walking towards his vehicle, which apparently constituted resisting arrest. My date became very upset, started yelling at him, and created a situation that led to more police vehicles arriving. She then tried to get me out of the police car, where I was now in the back seat and was also arrested. We dated for 2 years after that. She had me at dinner and hockey. Story 5. In college, my friend and I were taking identical twins out to dinner. We picked them up at their dorm, and right away, my friend started acting strangely. He became quiet and just sat there in awkward silence in the car while I tried to keep the conversation going. He was sweating a lot. The girls noticed, and there was a noticeable tension in the car. We finally arrived at the restaurant after the long drive, and I thought he was just nervous and that a drink might help him relax. I remember this very clearly. Just as I was thinking about getting him a drink, he reached out to open the door for the girls and suddenly became sick all over his arm. It happened quickly. There was a crowd outside because it was a popular restaurant in a college town and people were waiting for tables. Very quickly, it became noisy, with the girls making sounds of surprise and guys shouting. It wasn't just normal sickness. It was quite sudden and the smell was noticeable. It definitely changed the mood of the evening. He just awkwardly walked away, holding his arm out and looked quite unwell. Called him a taxi and he went home. Never spoke to the girls again because he was so embarrassed. I took both of them to a different bar for drinks. No one was hungry after what happened at the restaurant. If you think it's hard to make conversation on a first date, try taking identical twins out and having your friend leave because he suddenly became ill. It was a very awkward night. I dated one of the twins for a while, but we eventually went our separate ways. I'm sure she still tells the story. Michelle, if you happen to see this, say hello to Christina for me. Yeah, say hi to them for me too. Story 6. I had to pick her up for a first date of mini golf, but she had already been drinking when I arrived. I decided to have a few tequila shots with her to catch up. A little while later, she tried to make nachos and burned them badly. She became very upset, started crying, throwing things in the kitchen, and eventually sat on the floor crying. I calmed her down and we went to watch a movie. About halfway through, she started talking about difficult experiences in high school and how her parents weren't supportive of her artistic pursuits. For the record, she was 32 and I was 27 at the time. I offered a general supportive comment. She then got a determined look, moved off the couch, and initiated an intimate act. I noticed she was crying. I briefly thought I should stop her, but I didn't. She paused for a moment, said she really wished she had some nachos, and then continued. Afterward, she got up, went into her room, and fell asleep on her bed. I slept on the couch and left very early the next day. We never spoke again. What the heck was that? Story 7. I met this girl and she was pretty cute. She invited me over to her house and I immediately noticed that it wasn't in a great neighborhood. Anyway, I went inside and met her family. I was standing in the doorway and looked to my left. There was a large section of the house that was just dirt. Pieces of wood, like if a house was only partially built. I sat down for dinner. It was venison with some Cheetos. I tried to keep the date brief, but not before she gave me a handmade painting of a woman riding a horse. The date ended up being quite unusual. Story 8. He took me to the restaurant where his girlfriend worked as a waitress. When she came up to our table, he was shocked and got angry at her and asked why she was there. That he thought she had the night off and got angry at her like she had done something wrong. I noped out of there while they were busy arguing, and the next day I felt like going back and apologizing to her, but I didn't because I just did not want to get any more involved. I felt bad though, and I wish I'd gone to see her. Story 9. He made me a metal heart from a shop class, with his and my initials and the date etched on it. It was a blind date, so that was a bit unusual. We were going to go for a hike, parked in the lot, and saw two people carrying a shovel and a heavy black garbage bag into the woods. We noted their license plate number and called the police. The police told us to leave the area and wait for an officer at a nearby church parking lot. On the way to the church, my date saw a wrench in the middle of the road. We made a quick U-turn, stopped at the side of the road, and ran out to grab it, saying he could use it. The police met us at the church and we gave our statement. During the statement, the police were informed that the two people were burying their dog who had passed away. Nothing harmful, but still against regulations. The date was definitely disrupted, so he took me home. So I ended up with a metal heart and he got a wrench to remember the day by. Story 10. Set up on a blind date by mutual friends. She was actually pretty cool and attractive. I thought we connected well and we went back to her place. Things started to become intimate and out of nowhere, she just stopped. We were on her couch. She stood up and said, "Well, okay, good night." I walked to her bed. I naturally followed, thinking she just wanted to move to her bed. Nope, she was literally done. I tried to reinitiate things and she told me to stop in a very unfriendly tone. So I asked what was wrong, and she said I could come to bed with her and go to sleep, or she would be intimate with me, and then I could go home and never talk to her again. We were intimate, and then went home and never spoke to her again. Bro did not want to play the long game. Story 11. I had to stop in Charlotte, NC to get gas. While pumping, I saw two large groups of people walking towards each other. I thought it was strange, so I kept watching. As I got closer, they started pulling out what appeared to be weapons. I realized I was witnessing the beginning of a confrontation. I crouched down behind the pump while I continued to fill up, and I briefly considered leaving without paying as I just wanted to get out of there. I ran inside to pay, and the clerk asked what she should do about the situation outside. I asked her if she was bound protective glass, and she said yes. I told her to stay low and call the police. Then I hurried out and drove away quickly. My day was facing the other way and didn't see what was happening. I told her to duck down as I drove off. Quite a night. Story 12. I had been taking a small commuter jet twice a week for work and had gotten to know this lovely flight attendant quite well. One weekend, as we were both heading home, I asked her to dinner and she happily agreed. She was very attractive and I was excited. I took her to a very nice restaurant, and about 20 minutes into our meal, she started making very negative comments about our couple because of their different races. She became extremely angry and was saying some of the most unpleasant things I'd ever heard. Our waitress overheard her and the two of them began to argue. I was worried that they might get physical. The manager came over and asked us to leave, and she then started on him because of his appearance. It turned into a big scene with people from nearby tables verbally confronting both of us. Finally, the waitress told everyone that I wasn't involved in her behavior and had actually been defending the couple. At that moment, my date slapped me and then stormed out of the restaurant. I ended up getting a free meal from the manager and some complimentary drinks from the people sitting next to us. I never saw or heard from the woman again, and that Monday, my boss told me I no longer had to commute. Story 13. I went to the park with this girl, then we chatted for a couple of hours and smoked a little grass. As it got late, she suggested we go back to her dorm room. At this point, I thought the evening might become more intimate. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Almost immediately after walking in, I could tell something was off. There were many religious symbols and items all over her half of the small room she shared with a roommate. I think she noticed my surprise, so she explained that she was part of a very traditional branch of Christianity. Curious and a bit I asked what made it so traditional. Big mistake. Very enthusiastically, she started explaining all the details of her unusual beliefs, and I stupidly nodded along as if I understood. She mentioned that the earth and everything was created around 3,000 years ago. I unfortunately let out a chuckle at that statement, and the date started to go downhill. We ended up in a discussion about science versus religion for about 3 hours. Being a bit spy to try to formulate rational responses to her claims, and we couldn't agree on anything. After a while of getting nowhere, I decided to just go home and not see her again. Story 14. Long story short, she pretended to want to read the inscription on my class ring, then wouldn't give it back unless I kissed her goodnight. Being both angry at her and inexperienced in these sorts of things, I was not quite 17 years old yet. I managed to instead headbutt her, taking my ring while she was stunned and leave her standing speechless on her doorstep as I drove away. Story 15. Sitting down for drinks with my date. My ex walks in and sits facing me from a table on the other side of the room. I let my date know that the girl that just walked in was my recent ex, and she just happens to be sitting where she keeps looking over at us. Apparently, they knew each other in high school, and my ex hates this girl I'm with. She asked if I wanted to leave, but I said no. We had a great time, laughing and looking really happy. After we left, we made out in the parking lot, so I guess it went pretty well. Story 16. I replied to an ad on Craigslist. She was gorgeous, looking just like the picture she had sent and posted. Halfway through the date, which was going really well, she stopped and asked me, "So how long have you been a submissive?" This was followed by her explaining what that was, showing me in my introduction to the fantasy scene. Really great, but a little surreal. Story 17. I went out to a club with a girl once and she got us into the VIP section. Being a bit intoxicated, I suggested we take some substances, which I had a fair amount of at the time. Before I knew it, we were being intimate in this private lounge. She asked me to go to the car with her, which sounded appealing. I got in the car without looking closely and found 3 large men sitting in the back and front seats. It turned out she had sent them a text saying I had a lot of substances. They tried to rob me, but luckily I managed to open the door and run back to the club to find my friends very quickly. While the initial intimacy was enjoyable, the subsequent situation was quite alarming. Story 18. I had one first date before I met my now husband. This guy took me kayaking in a tandem kayak, but the water level was really low because the tide had gone out. We went out anyway since he couldn't think of anything else to do last minute. We kept scraping the bottom in a kayak. At one point, he got out to push and the water barely reached his knees. Afterward, he took me to meet his sister-in-law, married to his brother at her workplace. She then pressured me to keep dating him because he's a really nice guy. Then he took me back to his mom's house where he still lived with his younger sister. His little sister kept following us everywhere, which was fine with me since I really didn't want to be left alone with him. His mom was quite odd. She was ready to plan our wedding. Talked about me to her son right in front of me like it wasn't there. He commented on how beautiful I was while smiling strangely at me. Felt like forever before he took me back home. It was such a strange experience. Took me a while to discourage him after that. He was very upset that I wanted to be just friends and couldn't understand that I didn't want to be his girlfriend. He kept trying. He even wrote me a strange poem on MS Word and mailed it to me. I had to block him on social media and haven't had to deal with him since then. I moved a lot, and so he'd have to go to great lengths to find out where I am now. Story 19. Okay, Cupid date. We were both around 28 at the time. She was a flight attendant, so it took a couple of weeks for our schedules to align. She mentioned she lived with another guy, but he was gay and like her best friend. Throughout the evening, we talked about various things, and she brought up this game she plays with her girlfriends when they go out drinking. It's called the Johnson game. Basically, they hand their phone to someone else who then texts a random male contact to see if they can get a picture. The person who gets the most responses wins. She then told me she shows these pictures to her gay roommate to get his opinion. They discussed the pictures. The interesting part was that she must tell the story to all her dates because she then started to make fun of some guy for sending an unsolicited picture right after their first date. She seemed a bit eccentric, and we didn't talk after that. The best part was, a few weeks later when she asked me for a picture, I sent her one of a potato that looked a bit suggestive. And how did she react to that? Story 20. So this happened to me in college. My friends encouraged me to go out with this girl because they knew she was interested in me. So maybe it wasn't the very first date, but when we became intimate for the first time, things seemed to be going well. We had dinner and talked for a while, and she shared some of her favorite music with me in my dorm room. Then things became more intimate. At one point, while we were close, I suddenly felt my nose running. The lights were off. I touched my face and realized my nose was wounded quite a bit. Just as I moved away, she exclaimed in surprise and went quickly to the bathroom. Story 21. I ended up going to homecoming my junior year with my crush as my date, which felt like a miracle. We were seated at dinner in an Italian restaurant, facing each other. We weren't talking a lot, but out of nowhere I blurted out, "First name, last name, I'm gonna marry you someday, and we're gonna have 10 kids. He recalls sighing and looking out the window at the rain and the cars. We ended up falling in love on that date and got married 6.5 years later. We currently have 2 children with the hope of having more in the future. I don't actually remember saying that, but he brought it up once, and I cringed so hard I thought it might disappear. Sorry, sweetie. Man, how I wish I had that." Story 22. I was in 8th grade and I had my first girlfriend. I put that in quotes because, looking back, there was nothing romantic about our relationship. We were really just friends who decided to call ourselves boyfriend or girlfriend. Still, at the time, it was quite naive and didn't know any better. So we were on a date. We had each brought a friend to make things less awkward, though there was never any real awkwardness. We went to see a movie, and the first odd thing was that she didn't sit next to me. She sat on the other side of her friend. The second strange thing was that as we were leaving the theater, she quietly mentioned to me how cute she thought my friend was. Story 23. I met this girl for drinks, and the date went really well. Great conversation, lots of laughs, ice cream, and some kissing that was getting a bit more involved. We were kissing at a picnic table in a park in the dark under the moonlight, but we kept getting interrupted by people walking by and being quite loud, so I suggested we go somewhere more private. Her apartment was a few blocks away, so that was our next stop. When we got inside, I asked to use the bathroom. I walked in, started to get ready, and then looked into the toilet, and there it was. What was it? Something unpleasant floating in the toilet. There was some toilet paper too, but I couldn't help noticing it. What did I do? I used the toilet, flushed, washed my hands, and then we were intimate. Did I tell her about it? Of course not. I didn't want to spoil the moment. I ended up seeing her a few more times, but things didn't work out in the long run. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen in the bathroom. If you had a similar horrid experience, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 24. I had a first date with a girl from Tinder after about 3 days of nonstop suggestive texting. She wanted me to enter her house with all the lights off, go to her room, put on a blindfold, and lie down on her bed to wait for her. Keep in mind that we hadn't actually met in person yet. Needless to say, I was a little concerned that this could go wrong in several ways, so I tried to get a sense of the situation as best as I could, but ultimately went through with it. It was a memorable experience. We ended up being intimate multiple times that night. We didn't even hear each other's voices until after the first time. This was intentional and agreed upon beforehand. I guess sometimes taking a risk can lead to an interesting outcome. Story 25. I was friends with a married couple who were always trying to set me up. The wife had a picture of me and her husband at her workplace, and her friend Kate would often comment on how nice I looked. They persistently encouraged me to go on a date with Kate, and I eventually agreed to give her my number. Kate and I texted for a while. We found we had a lot in common, we exchanged pictures, and there was definitely a mutual attraction. Soon we began talking on the phone regularly and eventually decided to go on a date. A group date was planned. I would go with my married friends, and she would bring a few of her friends. The night of the date, my married friends couldn't make it. I called Kate, and she said it would be fine, so I went to the bar alone to meet her and her friends. I arrived, ordered a drink, and went to where she said she was sitting. But it wasn't just her and a friend or two. It was her and a group of about 10 to 12 people sitting around a large table. I found this odd, but she got up and hugged me. I grabbed a chair, pulled it up to the table next to her, and sat down. The group, including Kate, then proceeded to ignore me for the entire evening. Every time I tried to comment on the conversation or ask a question, the group would go silent and stare at me for a few seconds and continue talking as if I wasn't there. Every time I got up to get another drink or use the restroom, my chair was moved a little further away from the table. After about an hour of this, I asked Kate if she wanted to leave and go somewhere else. She just stared at me in surprise. I finished my drink and left. On Monday at work, Kate approached my friend and told her that she never wanted to speak to me or my friend again. To this day, I have no idea what I did to make her and her friends dislike me so much. Story 26. I went on a date with a girl who had a physical disability and I wasn't aware of it beforehand. Back in March, I was signing the lease for my new apartment that I moved into in May. While signing papers, I met a lovely girl who was intelligent and driven, and I got her number. A few weeks later, I arrived at the apartment complex to pick her up for a date. It was dark and I was busy making a playlist, so I didn't see her approach the car. She preferred to meet me there. She got in and she looked beautiful. We arrived at the restaurant, and as I started to walk in, I realized that she had difficulty walking without assistance. I was quite surprised as I hadn't noticed this at all before. It didn't change my perception of her, but the fact that I had completely missed it left me taken aback. We did go out a second time with my roommates after we moved in. During that date, she kept mispronouncing my name, which I found a bit irritating since she followed me on social media. She also had a somewhat grating personality. Story 27. We were at a restaurant and had just ordered dessert. Everything was going well until I noticed someone I recognized. My former boyfriend and all of his friends. The person I was on the date with was in the middle of talking and must have seen my surprised expression because he stopped and asked what was wrong. I explained the situation and said I wanted to leave as soon as possible. Then the dessert arrived and I ate that bread pudding very quickly. Luckily, the person I was with was understanding about it, but I just felt very awkward. Story 28. I was set up with this woman my friend liked. He was of a different background, and I gathered she preferred to date within her own community, so he introduced us. She was very attractive, owned a hair salon, so her hair always looked great and seemed perfect in many ways. We went to a drive-in movie, and we were having a pleasant time. As things became a bit more intimate, we put the windows up for privacy. That's when I noticed a strong, unpleasant odor. It was quite off-putting. Didn't finish the movie. I took her home, and the experience left me feeling very uncomfortable. I learned that appearances can be deceiving. You sure it wasn't your car? Story 29. This girl asked me out by passing me a note at work. I don't know why I said yes. I'd never spoken to her before. I guess I thought it was kind of cute. Turns out she was really loud and obnoxious in real life. We doubled with her cousin and his girlfriend, and they were super rude and loud and irritating. Another girl comes into the restaurant and notices their boorish behavior and catches my eye, and I shake my head to let her know that I'm not like these people I'm with. She gives me a sympathetic smile and orders herself some food. We all leave, and I pretend like I'd left my wallet inside. I went in and got the other girl's number. Story 30. It wasn't a date, but it's still a pretty memorable story. As part of my sales job, I travel and meet with clients. Often these meetings are over coffee, breakfast, lunch, etc. I went out to lunch with a client and his junior representative, both of whom I was meeting for the first time. Things were going smoothly. Introductions, product overview, the usual. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, the junior representative started having a seizure right in the middle of my presentation. It wasn't extremely severe, but I wasn't aware of his epilepsy beforehand and don't have much experience with seizures, so I was quite surprised and a bit nervous as it began. The senior representative explained what was happening, and eventually, the junior representative recovered. However, I was completely thrown off my game and just wanted the lunch to end. As if that wasn't awkward enough, it got worse. Much worse. About 5 minutes later, the senior representative excused himself to the restroom. While he was gone, the junior representative and I talked about epilepsy because I was curious and he was happy to share. It made things a little less awkward, but not by much. I still wanted to leave. About 20 minutes passed and the senior representative still hadn't returned. It's worth noting that the word senior applied to both his title and his age. I think it was around 75. I pointed out to the junior representative that his boss hadn't come back yet, and we both thought it was a little strange. The junior representative went to check on his boss, and as they returned to the table, I could tell something was wrong. The senior representative was walking very strangely and was sweating, and the junior representative had a look of discomfort on his face. When they were about 5 feet from the table, the smell hit me. Something has happened, and I'm afraid I need to cut our meeting short and head back to my office right away. This gentleman had experienced an accident on the way to the bathroom and spent 20 minutes trying to clean himself up. Keep in mind, he was wearing a full suit for this business meeting. I sat for a moment, quite taken aback by the situation. Eventually, I gathered myself and left more than enough cash on the table so we could just leave. And that's when I realized the worst part about this whole experience. I had driven them to the restaurant. I'd stopped by their office to pick them up and offer them a ride, so I had to put the 75-year-old man in a soiled suit in the backseat of my car and roll all the windows down in late January just to manage the odor for the 5-mile drive back to his office. Needless to say, we didn't conduct much business with each other after that. Story 31. Went out for drinks with a guy from OkCupid. It was a nice date. We got along well and had fun walking around the city. Afterward, we went back to his place to hang out. At one point, we were outside and he went inside briefly. Suddenly, a woman ran into the parking lot and started yelling at me. "Have you seen my husband? Where's my husband?" I was very surprised and a little scared. She seemed very agitated. I told her I hadn't seen her husband, but she continued to question me about who I was with. I said I was with a friend inside, and she demanded, "Bring him out here so I can make sure it's not my husband." It was clear my date wasn't her husband. He was much younger than her and had just moved to the city. I wasn't sure what to do, so I went inside and told my date what was happening. He locked the doors, and I could still hear her yelling outside about her husband. Ironically, earlier in the evening, my date had mentioned a serious relationship with someone from his hometown. Story 32. One day, I received an email from OkCupid. I was confused because it mentioned my usual online username. Apparently, I had taken some online quiz that automatically created a dating profile for me. Anyway, I was moving to a new city to start college, so I thought, why not? And decided to try it out. I started talking to this girl, and we eventually decided to meet up casually for coffee. We chatted and really connected, so I decided to see where things might lead. Went back to my place to watch some Community, as I was really enjoying it at the time. Since I was in student housing, we went to my room, which literally had just a bed and a TV. Naturally, we started getting close. One thing led to another, and she began to be intimate with me. It was my first experience of that kind, and it felt amazing. She paused, looked me directly in the eye, and said, you remind me of my father, who, by the way, was passing away and only had a few months left to live. She started crying more, saying how we would never hang out again. I comforted her, rubbing her back and saying we would definitely hang out, while I was actually thinking, definitely not. Anyway, I calmed her down and she finished what she was doing. The next morning we got up, I walked her to the door, said goodbye, that I'd call her again, and I never heard from her since. Story 33. I went out on a date with a very attractive woman from our local music scene some years ago. I'd known this girl for a while. She'd been to my house and we had hung out before, but never as a date. I can't recall what show we went to that night, but it was a lot of fun until the bar closed. After the bands finished and the bar was closing, I couldn't find her anywhere. This girl could be quite the social butterfly at times and was known to spend time with certain bands backstage. It didn't really bother me. Having been a musician myself, I had a good idea of what to expect and didn't see it as a big deal. After waiting around for about an hour, I got tired of waiting and walked a few blocks home. Sometime later, I heard some rustling in the front porch. I'm pretty protective when it comes to people messing with my property, so I was ready to confront whoever it was. I opened the door, ready to see what was happening, and found my very intoxicated date trying to attach a note to my screen door with a duct tape. The note said something threatening. I set aside what I was holding and asked what she was doing. She yelled at me intoxicatedly about taping a threat to my door for leaving her at the bar. I told her to come inside and calm down. We ended up having a very intense and intimate night. To this day, I have no idea where or how she got a fresh roll of duct tape in the middle of the night. Our dating didn't last, but we remained intimate on and off for years and are still friends today. Anyone who says don't get involved with someone who's a bit wild might be missing out. Just know what kind of personality you're dealing with. Story 34. A girl I met on OkCupid had turned out to have a problem with alcohol. As soon as I picked her up, she said, "Let's go get a drink." So we went to a bar near her place. Then we left for a pub for dinner, but they didn't serve food despite their sign, so we had another drink. No big deal, 2 drinks, no worries. Then we left and went to a real restaurant and she ordered another strong drink. Halfway through the meal, she was having trouble eating and slurring her words. I asked for the bill and some takeaway containers. I practically had to help her to her car and she stumbled with the leftovers falling and making a mess in someone's vehicle. I could feel other people in the restaurant looking. I was very embarrassed. I took her home, helped her to the couch, and she said, "You're so nice. You're so nice." Leaned in to kiss me and promptly fell asleep, snoring on my shoulder. I took the remaining food and left. She texted a couple of days later and apologized. Alcoholism is a serious issue. Story 35. I was 22 and worked maintenance at a park near my house. It was nearing the end of summer and most of the park employees would be returning to college soon. The girl who worked at the boat rental had been flirting with me throughout the summer, so I asked her on a date in mid-August, thinking it might be a date or two before the summer ended. I took her to a baseball game that Wednesday night. The date was wonderful. We enjoyed each other's company, had a lot to talk about, and the game was exciting too. Around the 7th inning, I asked if she wanted to hang out that weekend. She turned to me and said, "I'm not available this weekend. I have surgery tomorrow morning at 6 for a brain tumor." I was completely taken aback and didn't know how to respond. So many questions raced through my mind. Why was she there with me and not with her family the night before a serious surgery? Was she planning to tell me at some point if I hadn't asked for another date? It was all true. She found me on Facebook later and I've seen her recover and face another tumor. Now she's healthy, married, and I believe expecting a child. Story 36. I went on a date with a girl in her early 20s who had very protective parents who were wary of online dating. To get her to go out with me that night, I had to number 1, pretend to drink from a glass of water they offered me at her house. They wanted my fingerprints, but I didn't drink it and jokingly accused them of trying to trick me. Number 2, show them my ID so they could verify my address. Number 3, take her friend along and claim to have no money, so I paid for both of them. And 4, use a marker on a paper map to show them our planned route, where we were going, and what time I would have them home. I was eager and new to dating, so I went along with it. The date itself was a bit odd, and her friend barely spoke to me the entire time. When the date was over and I was dropping them off, I hugged my date and her friend stood very close by, likely to intervene if I did anything unexpected. She contacted me through emails for a while afterward, saying she liked me and that her parents approved of me. However, I told her that the whole experience made me uncomfortable and it wasn't something I wanted to pursue. Story 37. I was on a first date and we went to a nice Italian place. After dinner, we were in the parking lot talking about what to do next, and while we stood there, a high-speed police chase was going on. The car they were pursuing tried to jump a curb but ended up flipping entirely, landing about 20 feet from us. The driver managed to crawl out, but cops surrounded him and took him away. Since we saw it all go down, we had to give statements, and the whole thing freaked her out enough that she just wanted to go home. Story 38. So, not so much weird as kind of horrible. I went on a date with a girl I had a big crush on in high school. We had food and drinks, and then took a lovely walk on a former train bridge that had been converted into a walking bridge. Then, suddenly, two young men came up behind us, speaking indistinctly and unsteady on their feet. One of them climbed onto the railing, which made me concerned. Before I could say anything, something terrible happened very quickly. The guy slipped and fell into the river and was carried away by the strong current. The young man's body was found downriver a few days later, and there was no second date. That'll do it. Story 39. I had recently moved to a new town for a job after college and decided to try Tinder. I started talking with a girl and we agreed to meet for drinks. Keep in mind, this was my first time using online dating and I wasn't very experienced with dating at the time, so I was naturally a bit anxious. 15 minutes before we were supposed to meet, I got a text from her saying, "I think I need to go to the hospital. Everything hurts. I think I'm having appendicitis. Can you tell me where the nearest hospital is?" My anxiety instantly turned to concern, then to feeling like I needed to help. This was no longer just a date. It felt like a rescue mission. I quickly texted her the location of a hospital, and she replied that she didn't have a car, so I offered to pick her up. I met her at her workplace, which was a sandwich shop, and we drove to the emergency room while making awkward small talk as she was clearly uncomfortable in my car. We arrived at the ER and sat in the waiting area next to people with various injuries, asking each other about our favorite shows and bands. When the nurse started asking her for a medical history, I realized I'd only known this girl for about 17 minutes and already knew quite a bit of her personal information. When the nurse asked who I was, for some reason I blurted out, "Oh, I'm the husband." She thought it was funny and played along. Anyway, we went to the patient room and she changed into a gown. She then went for a CT scan or something. I sat in the emergency room area watching TV and she eventually came back. It turned out it wasn't appendicitis, just cramps or something similar. She seemed very appreciative that I had stayed with her for about 2.5 hours and had just left after taking her to the hospital. I ended up taking her back home and dropping her off, and she gave me a few sandwiches from her work. The date ended there, but I did meet up with her a few days later. Ultimately, she became quite attached, and I ended things before things progressed too far, and that was the end of that. P.S. The sandwiches weren't very good, which ultimately didn't help things. Man, kicking someone while they're down. Story 40. I met a girl on Match.com. We met at a restaurant and had a drink or two. Things were going pretty well, and we decided to go to another place, a bar. She said she wanted to change first, as she supposedly lived just around the corner. She left and returned about 15 minutes later wearing a more revealing top. She looked nice, but at this point I started to feel a bit uneasy. We had another drink, and she started talking about how if we ever got together, I would have to go to church with her and the kids. We were both single parents. I told her I didn't go to church and wouldn't, but she kept playfully insisting, "Yes, you will." So I didn't take it too seriously. Eventually, we drove to this other bar, her regular spot. Everyone in this place seemed to know her, and there were several older men who were very attentive to her. She was taking shots while I sipped a beer. I was thinking it was time for me to leave. We went outside for a smoke, and she started crying, saying she knew how this, her and I, was going to end. I told her I needed to go, so I walked her to the passenger side of my truck and then walked around to the driver's side to get in. As soon as I got in and closed the door, she started kissing me and being very touchy. By this point, I was feeling very uncomfortable, but we kissed for a few minutes. Then she suggested we be intimate right then and there. I declined, explaining I wasn't prepared. She then asked a very inappropriate question about my health. I drove her home, and as soon as she was out of the truck, I left quickly. She sent me strange apologies the next day, but I didn't respond. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.